Chapter 161. Damien, help! Damien, help! Tony shouted, thrusting his palm forward. The arc reactor in his chest spun wildly, its glow shifting to a deep, pulsating purple that washed over the entire beach. Void energy crackled around him, and before the beam even formed, a shockwave rippled across the sand, scorching it in an instant. Moments later, the power intensified to a terrifying degree. The very air seemed to smolder. Then, in one blinding instant, Tony unleashed a colossal violet beam 100 meters wide. The ray sliced across the sea like a scythe, carving a gaping fissure in the water's surface wherever it passed. Within seconds, the beam had spanned several hundred meters and struck the destroyer dead on. Armor plates warped and fizzled under the searing void energy, and the massive construct was hurled backward by the impact. Boom! A monstrous mushroom cloud rose over the waves. The force of the explosion churned the ocean into towering swells and sent tremors through the ground. Thor's hair shot straight up as he planted his feet, fighting gale-strength winds that threatened to knock him off his feet. He stared, jaw agape, at the raw, devastating power of Tony's attack, utterly stunned. When the storm and shockwave finally subsided, seawater from both sides rushed into the yawning, 100-meter-wide chasm. Tony's heads-up display flickered with damage readings as he spoke into his comlink. "Jarvis, status report." "The target is stirring," Jarvis replied. Tony ground his teeth. "You've got to be kidding me. It didn't even fall." He'd channeled 80% of his void energy into that last strike, and still the Asgardian destroyer clambered to its feet. Now he had only 20% left in void mode, which would expire in 5 minutes. If he couldn't finish it quickly, he'd have to use that remaining energy just to pin the destroyer down, and, if it came to it, face Thor himself. Hundreds of miles away in New York, Damien watched the exchange on a secure monitor, ready to jump in at a moment's notice. He stared in disbelief at the raw power behind Stark's blow. By dumping most of his void energy into the armor and firing it like a point-blank cannon, Tony had landed a devastating hit. It hadn't destroyed the destroyer, but it was a game-changing trump card. The destroyer is forged from blackened gold, a metal no one in this world can break. "So don't lose hope," Tony urged. At his words, Thor finally shook off his confusion. "Great, you're still in the mood to comfort me," he grumbled. "Right now we need a plan," Tony snapped back. A jagged piece of metal lay at his feet, the remains of his gauntlet, destroyed on impact. Unfazed, he tapped his wrist. "Jarvis, teleport me a replacement." He scanned the new gauntlet as it materialized. "Even with a full-strength blast, I could only bend the destroyer's armor. There's no way to shatter it." Thor glanced skyward, remorse in his eyes. "Once called forth, the destroyer will not relent unless its summoner wills it to return." "Then order it back," Tony shot back. Thor winced, unable to argue. "Fine, let someone with that power do it." Tony clenched his fist. "If we can't break its defense head-on, we'll have to outsmart it. It isn't invincible. There's always another way." With that, he flicked on his repulsors and took a step forward, determination blazing in his eyes. Damien's voice crackled over the comm. "Loki sent the destroyer to kill me, not to obliterate Blue Star." At that, Soul's eyes flickered with uncertainty. He hesitated, then shook his head decisively. "Even if we have no other plan, I won't send you to your death just to force the destroyer's retreat." Tony's reply was urgent. "But there is no other way, unless one of us sacrifices ourselves." He ran a hand through his hair. "I poured everything into a full-power blast, and it barely scratched its armor." Saul frowned. "Your maximum output was incredible, far beyond anything we've mustered, yet it still held firm?" Tony nodded grimly. "Every jewel we threw at it dissipated against that indestructible shell." Far below, the ocean churned. If the destroyer climbed from the surf for another assault, they'd be sitting ducks. Soul's brow creased. "We're sitting on a powder keg. No matter how you slice it, if it resurfaces, we're finished." Damien's jaw tightened. "Then you need someone, something, strong enough to stand toe-to-toe with it." A charged silence fell. Saul exhaled. "There is one possibility." Tony's eyes darted between Saul and Damien. "You mean that, being?" Soul's voice dropped to a whisper. "Yes, but summoning it comes with a price." Damien squared his shoulders. "Then let's hear the cost." In the gathering gloom, the destroyer's silhouette loomed on the horizon, an unstoppable threat, and their only hope lay in a power no one fully understood. Damien, I know you're watching. Come and help us. Please show yourself. We can't handle this destroyer on our own." Tony Stark nodded to himself, then raised his voice across the battlefield. "Damien Ambalaka! Damien Ambalaka, where are you?" Thor, standing beside him, perked up at the name. Since arriving in New York, he'd met many influential figures through Daisy Johnson and Jane Foster. One name kept coming up, Harvey Ambalaka, a young magnate every bit as famous as Tony. Rumors cast him as both fabulously wealthy and hopelessly romantic, but otherwise unremarkable. And yet here was Tony, summoning him like a genie. The Asgardian's eyes widened in disbelief. No sooner had Tony finished speaking than the air ahead of them rippled. A small vortex, black as the void itself, opened before them. Thor stepped back, hammer at the ready. From that swirling darkness emerged a young man with raven-black hair and a confident, lopsided grin. "I knew you were watching," Damien Ambalaka said, landing lightly on the rubble-strewn ground. Tony's broad smile returned. "Perfect timing. With you here, this destroyer doesn't stand a chance." Thor sheathed Mjolnir, relief flooding his face. Together, genius, god, and billionaire, they squared their shoulders against the mechanical menace looming in the distance. Damien's surveillance had been flawless. No one had the slightest inkling they were being watched. Thor stared in stunned silence. He could scarcely fathom how powerful Damien had become. "Tony," Damien said quietly, "give me Mjolnir." Stark looked up, disbelief flickering across his face. "You want Mjolnir? This is an Asgardian matter, Damien. You're not exactly royalty." From a swirling rift in the void behind them, Damien stepped forward. Tony exhaled in relief, as if he'd been waiting for backup. Then Damien's gaze hardened. "Tony, please, I need your help." Tony's shoulders slumped. "You know I'm with you, but honestly, the two of us can't handle him." No sooner had the words left Stark's mouth than the destroyer, which had been rising from the ocean depths, felt that unseen presence and snapped to life. Its massive frame hovered above the water, metal plating shifting and contorting as ancient runes ignited in blazing gold. A searing beam of light lanced from its chest, hurtling toward Damien, Thor, and Tony. "Watch out!" Thor cried. He hefted Mjolnir, ready to deflect the blast, but the beam was on them in an instant. With a thunderous roar, the destroyer's golden energy swept across the battlefield. Tony dove for cover behind a jagged rock. Thor pivoted, swinging Mjolnir in a wide arc to shield Damien. And Damien, standing defiantly in the beam's path, raised his hand, fingertips crackling with newfound power, determined not to yield. Thor frowned as he watched Tony remain motionless. Then Saul witnessed something unbelievable. Damien shifted his stance ever so slightly, raised his hand, and stood firm against the full force of the destroyer's golden beam, the very energy meant to rend worlds apart. The moment the beam struck Damien's palm, violet energy erupted around him, twisting the dazzling gold into a pulsating purple sphere. In a heartbeat, Damien and that crackling orb of power were drawn into a wry, feet in the void, sucked through a black hole, and hurled across the cosmos. Thor's eyes went wide in stunned disbelief. The destroyer, operating at maximum power, had been stopped in its tracks by a single man. Damien's calm voice cut through the shocked silence. "I haven't even decided if I'm going to help you. So why the urgency?" Unfazed, Damien stood his ground, violet aura still shimmering around him. His expression was cool and unreadable, as if nothing, not even the destroyer's might, could shake him. Chapter 162, Devastation. In the blink of an eye, Thor watched Damien's form dissolve into nothingness. Alarm flared in his chest as he scanned the skies, and then, right before the massive silhouette of the destroyer, a dark rift tore open in the void. From that black wound stepped Damien, and in that instant Thor felt a chilling, all-consuming terror, as if an unseen predator had fixed its gaze upon him. Even Tony Stark, standing nearby, went rigid, his usually confident eyes narrowed in alarm. Without hesitation, Damien's right arm transformed into a blade of deep violet energy. He moved with preternatural speed, unleashing more than 40 precise slashes that rent the destroyer's Uru metal frame. The legendary, indestructible armor splintered like driftwood, fracturing into countless shards. Yet even in ruin, the destroyer was not truly defeated. Anticipating its resilience, Damien extended his void-forged blade and summoned corrosive shadows that crept across every jagged surface. Black tendrils severed the destroyer's link to divine power, and with a final, echoing groan of warped metal, the automaton went lifeless, reduced to nothing more than scrap. As the last echoes of energy faded, Damien held his ground for a heartbeat, the void's resonance humming along his blade. Then, radiating quiet authority, he rose into the air. Below him, the shattered remnants of Uru metal drifted down like metallic snowflakes toward the churning sea. Damien paused above the waves only for a moment before turning back toward the shore, his silhouette framed by the settling storm and the ruin he had wrought. Damien dropped a handful of gleaming metal fragments onto the sand. "Tony, keep these," he said. "This is Asgardian Uru, extremely rare. Take it back, study it, do whatever you want with it. I'm heading out now. Don't bother me unless it's urgent." The pieces struck the beach with sharp metallic clinks. To the eye they looked small, but each fragment was impossibly dense. Uru was mineral-built magic, heavier than any earthly metal. Damien gave Tony a curt nod, then turned on his heel and vanished in a flash of light. Tony crouched to gather the glowing shards, while the echo of their impact faded across the shore. Before he could say a word, Thor stepped around the ruined bulk of the destroyer. The once formidable construct, his father Odin's masterpiece, lay in ruined heaps of shattered metal. Its spark of consciousness had been utterly extinguished. Thor paused, chest rising and falling as he took in the scene. Then he looked at Tony with an expression of both wonder and contrition. "Tony," he said quietly, "I have to admit, I didn't believe you when you said someone might lift Mjolnir by sheer force alone, but what I just witnessed, Damien cut through the destroyer like it was nothing and snuffed out its divine power entirely. I believe you now." Thor stood, breathless, his entire outlook on power shattered and renewed by what he had just witnessed. Damien met his gaze evenly. "I've told you, I have no reason to lie." Tony Stark, ever the opportunist, reached out and picked up a small shard of Uru. He weighed the metal in his palm, his eyes gleaming with excitement. "This is the real deal," he said. "With Uru's ability to bond and transform, I could forge armor unlike anything I've ever built. It'd make my suit nearly unstoppable." Thor nodded, but his curiosity burned brighter. "I know all that, Tony. What I want to know is, who is he?" Tony tightened his grip on the Uru. "Yeah, who is he, really?" The Thunder God shook his head. "He refuses to reveal his identity, and I can't force him. He only helps when he chooses. Today, he came to save my life, but if it weren't for the Destroyer's sudden attack, he might have left right away, caring nothing for the fate of Midgard." Tony sighed, tucking the Uru shard into a secure pocket on his belt. "Then we'll just have to ask him again, sometime later." Thor studied Damien thoughtfully, curiosity undiminished, while Tony already turned his mind to potential armor designs, and the Mista Rai of the man who had saved them both. Moments later, a squadron of armored jets roared down from the sky and snatched the Uru metal from the clearing. Tony tapped his chest plate, activating a discreet comm channel. "Jarvis, send the Uru back to the manor." He turned to Thor, arms folded. "If he really wants to see you, he'll come on his own. I don't want you chasing after him. That could end badly. And don't worry too much about Damien." Thor raised an eyebrow. "Then explain why the Destroyer attacked you in the first place." Tony sighed and ran a hand through his hair. "It's simpler than you think. My idiot brother Loki is playing sick. He lied about Father's death to keep me from returning to Asgard. As soon as I found out, he sent the Destroyer to finish me off." Steve, standing nearby, frowned. "So it's family drama. Got it. You'd better go back and sort out that brother of yours. If you need backup, you know where to find us." Tony nodded. "Yeah, I'll swing by, say goodbye to Jane and the others, then head up to Asgard for a visit." Steve smiled and gave him a firm nod in return. "Safe travels, Tony." Saul crossed his arms and shook his head. "This family scandal stops here. I don't want it spilling into the public eye, nor do I intend to waste time on such nonsense. As for the Uru metal, it will remain under my care as a trophy for the foreseeable future." Tony Stark stepped forward, his face turning serious. "If you decide later that you'd like some of it back, I'll happily hand over half. Even though Damien was the one who technically saved my life, it was at my request that he came here. And let's be honest, Asgard still has plenty of Uru lying around." He offered Saul a wry grin. "So take what you need." Saul waved Tony off, gratitude shining in his eyes. "No, you're the one who deserves the thanks. Had you not sent Damien, I would have had to dismantle the destroyer myself. The only way to stop it would have been for me to die, forcing Loki to call it home. You saved more than just my pride today. You saved my life." He paused, then added, "One day you must visit Blue Star, my home planet. Consider this an open invitation, but next time please enter through the front gate." Tony laughed and gave a mock bow. "It's a deal." Thor, standing beside them, nodded in agreement. The tension in the air dissolved as the three heroes shared a moment of mutual respect, the Uru metal safely secured, and a new alliance forged. Tony shot back into the sky and hit the comlink to S-Shield in one smooth motion. He gave a terse rundown. Quarantine the entire beach, seal off every exit, and dispatch engineering teams to repair the damage immediately. S-Shield had already been tracking the fight via satellite. A battle that big, left unchecked, would spark a media firestorm. Better to lock it down now, before word got out. From orbit, the agents had witnessed two extraordinary combatants, a blonde god wielding a hammer and Tony himself, both displaying abilities that far outstripped anything in today's arsenal. But the true shock arrived in the form of a hulking metal monstrosity. Every one of Tony's cutting-edge countermeasures bounced off its impenetrable armor. The thing was a fortress of steel, and our defenses were flatlining. Then, without warning, Damien entered the fray. At his touch, the metal behemoth's defenses collapsed like cardboard. What technology couldn't scratch, Damien shattered. He dismantled that steel terror with ruthless efficiency, leaving nothing but twisted wreckage. Watching the figures on their screens, S-Shield operatives exchanged uneasy glances. They had braced for a worst-case scenario, but nothing in their playbooks prepared them for Damien's raw power. It was clear his abilities lay well beyond any known science or ordnance. By the time Tony wrapped up his call, the decision was unanimous. Next time Damien appeared, S-Shield would do everything in its power to steer clear. Tony muted his comm. Third update sent. Out. Chapter 163. You Have Changed Thor first brought Jane and Daisy up to speed on everything that had happened. Then, without hesitation, he returned to Asgard to confront Loki. Tony went back to his mansion, demolished a gargantuan meal, and then threw himself into researching Uru metal. If Uru's legendary combination of unbreakable hardness and impressive malleability could be bonded to steel armor, it ought to shrug off even the most concentrated void energy. After all, using 80% of his void rays hadn't phased the destroyer's plating. Damien, having dismantled the destroyer single-handedly, felt no need to linger. He figured Thor would handle Asgard in his own way. Despite his fury, Thor would never kill his brother. At worst, he'd lock Loki away. Satisfied that the realm was in capable hands, Damien slipped into his car and headed out for a long drive, letting the hum of the engine clear his mind. But Loki wouldn't remain idle for long. He'd been shaken to his core by the sight of the destroyer torn apart before him. Never in his wildest nightmares had he imagined someone could do what Damien had done and live to tell about it. With that realization burning in his thoughts, he vowed to return to Earth soon and wreak vengeance on the one who had so thoroughly upended his plans. The destroyer's power far exceeds even that of Thor's enchanted hammer. Though it lacks independent intellect, nothing more than an unthinking war puppet, its strength is beyond question. Should it be unleashed on Asgard, only Odin himself could stand against it. Neither Thor nor any other god could halt its advance. Loki knew, too, that he would have to weigh his future plans, especially any foray to the Blue Star, very carefully, and above all, he must avoid drawing the attention of that mortal, Damien. Word reached Loki that Thor was on his way home. Anticipating the moment his brother stepped foot in the palace, Loki slipped into the throne room even before Thor arrived. He knew that so long as Odin's heir was within sight, he would think twice before acting against his father or his people. It was only moments after Loki took his place in the shadows that Thor's thunder heralded the prince's return. Frigga, seated beside Odin's great throne, leapt to her feet in surprise. "Thor, you've come back already?" she breathed. "I have much to tell you, mother," Thor replied, his broad shoulders still echoing with the war he had left behind. In his right hand, he held Mjolnir, ever ready for conflict. Gently, he placed a reassuring hand on Frigga's arm. "Please, sit. I'll explain everything soon." Once his mother was settled, Thor's gaze drifted to the stooped figure of his brother, lurking at the edge of the hall. "Loki," Thor said, his tone warm as he approached. "It's good to see you home." Loki stepped forward, folding his lanky frame into an elegant bow. A slow, amused smile curved his lips. "Brother, your happiness is contagious," he replied softly. Yet behind that courteous grin, his green eyes glimmered with secrets he had come to share with Odin before Thor could interfere. And so, beneath the towering pillars of Asgard's throne room, the stage was set. The destroyer's shadow stretched closer by the hour, and Loki's hidden agenda promised to test every bond of blood and loyalty, even as Odin prepared to weigh the fate of realms. Damien's voice was icy as he faced Loki. "If you really cared about me, would you have sent the destroyer to kill me?" Loki met his glare coolly. "If I'd truly wanted you gone before, I would have set a trap, or simply stabbed you. That was our usual banter. But this time, you actually let the destroyer come after me," Damien shot back. "Isn't that crossing a line?" Thor's eyes blazed as he stepped forward. "Loki, did you do this?" At his son's accusation, Frigga's breath caught in her throat. She turned to Loki, disbelief written all over her face. "Thor is your brother?" Loki bristled, irritated by his mother's confusion. "We've never been close, Mother," he said, struggling to keep his composure under her gaze. "But Father and I have always treated you and Thor the same way." His next words cut deep. "You wanted a king, so I let you have one." A look of heartbreak flashed across Frigga's face, but before she could respond, Loki's features trembled. In the blink of an eye, he blurred into a pale wisp of shadow and vanished. "Loki!" Thor roared, lunging forward, only to find empty air where his brother had stood. Damien's ears snapped open before his eyes did. The ruckus in his chambers had yanked him out of the deep, healing sleep he desperately needed. Normally, he'd call upon his slumber to calm the tempest of power surging through his veins, but right now, his two sons were on the brink of a deadly clash. He had no choice but to rouse himself. The abrupt awakening only made the storm inside him swirl more wildly. "Damien, you mustn't stay awake." Frigga's voice quavered with panic as she hurried to his side. "Your slumber is the only thing holding all that power together. If you don't rest, Loki's temper, well, you know him, someone's going to get hurt, or worse." He sat up, every muscle taut beneath his skin. He felt the raw energy rippling through him, begging for release, but his heart clenched at the distant sounds of his sons, Loki's snarling defiance and Sol's desperate retorts. "I can't let them tear each other apart," Damien said in a low voice. "And you wouldn't want that either." He cast Frigga a steady look. "Promise me you'll keep the palace safe while I go. I'll return as quickly as I can." Tears glinted in Frigga's eyes, torn between relief and fear. Somewhere beyond the chamber door, Sol's urgent shout drifted up. "Father, hurry!" Frigga swallowed hard and nodded. Damien rose, letting the legendary armor of the God King assemble itself around him in a cascade of molten light and steel. Each piece clicked into place, sealing him in newfound strength and resolve. With one last glance at Frigga's trembling form, Damien walked toward the shimmering arch of the Rainbow Bridge. Every step resonated with purpose. He would not fail his sons, nor let the throne he had sworn to protect fall to ruin. Thor could read Loki's thoughts, and Odin was no less perceptive. When Odin arrived on the Rainbow Bridge, he found the two brothers locked in a fierce argument. "Why have you grown so weak after your trip to Blue Star?" Thor demanded, his hammer glowing faintly in his hand. Loki's face darkened. "As long as Jotunheim is destroyed, Asgard's borders will be safe forever." Fury cracked his voice. His carefully laid plan had fallen apart. Thor took a step forward, concern knitting his brow. "Loki, I know you want to stand equal with me, but is total extermination the only way to defend Asgard's honor?" Loki snarled. "Are you proposing we join forces? That's laughable." "If the frost giants ever return," Thor pressed on, "do you intend to drive them back alone, risking the lives of all our people? Tell me, can you name a more efficient, more certain solution than wiping them out?" Loki's scowl wavered. Thor's words struck at wounds he'd carried all his life. Born of the same father, yet so different in power, only when Loki discovered his frost giant heritage did he understand the inherent gap between him and Thor. Silence fell as Odin's presence loomed over them. He crossed his arms, his one eye fixed on Loki. The moment stretched, heavy with unspoken truths and impossible choices. Damien lacked the kind of raw, godlike power that set Thor apart from mere mortals. He longed to stand beside Thor in glory, to win the loyalty of the Asgardians, and, most of all, to earn the pride of his father and mother. He knew that to achieve such honor, he would have to perform a deed worthy of Asgard's greatest sagas. What could be more legendary than the total destruction of Jotunheim, ridding the 9 realms of the frost giants once and for all? At first, Damien wasn't overly concerned about Sol's return. He assumed Thor's convictions would mirror his own. If Jotunheim posed a threat, it ought to be erased, for good. But everything changed when Sol came back from Earth after less than 2 weeks and seemed a different person entirely. Report number 4 has just been sent. Chapter 164, see it for yourself. With my strength, your magic, and father's presence, Loki proclaimed, pacing back and forth on the cracked rainbow bridge, I will guarantee Asgard's peace. Thor watched his brother's desperation with a mix of sympathy and frustration. He folded his arms and said quietly, Why won't you listen, Loki? Father has protected Asgard these past centuries. Passing that responsibility on to us wouldn't weaken him. In fact, it would ensure his legacy endures. Loki's voice trembled as he replied, If it's the throne I want, you'd hand it to me in an instant. You'd humble yourself for my sake, but Father has never acknowledged me as he acknowledges you. Thor's expression softened. He took a step forward. Then let's find another way to earn his recognition. Together, come with me, brother. For a moment, Loki wavered, as if he'd finally believed in Thor's sincerity. But even as hope flickered in his eyes, the bridge beneath them shuddered violently. Stone and light fractured, and the pathway to Asgard's vaults broke apart. Before Loki could steady himself, the shattered planks gave way and he plunged toward the void. Loki, Thor roared. Without hesitation, he rocketed forward, stretching out his hand. The wind howled around them, but Thor's grip was iron. He caught Loki's wrist in midair and hauled him back to solid ground. Breathing heavily, Loki stared at his brother with wide, fearful eyes. Thor pulled him upright, steadying him with a firm hand on his shoulder. See for yourself, Thor said gently. I would move heaven and earth to protect you. Loki swallowed hard, realizing in that moment that his brother's love and his own worth needed no royal decree to be proven. The rainbow bridge shuddered violently beneath them. Thor's footing gave way, and for a heartbeat he and his companion seemed destined to plunge into the void. Then a firm hand closed around Thor's wrist. Father, pull us up, quickly! Thor gasped, looking up into Odin's storm-gray eyes. Odin said nothing. His gaze flicked past Thor to the darkening chasm below. He knew what he would find there. Even under the heavy sleep magic that bound him, Loki had overheard every whispered command in Odin's throne room, and Loki, thinking himself hidden, had sent the destroyer to slay his own brother. Odin drew deep on his power, hauling Thor back onto solid planks of rainbow light. The bridge stilled and glowed once more as he set his son safely on its span. Thor blinked, heart pounding, and peered over the edge, just in time to see Loki hovering on the brink. Their eyes met. A slow, sad smile curved Loki's lips. With a small, almost affectionate nod toward his father, Loki wrenched his hand free from Thor's grasp and stepped off the bridge. He fell into the glittering expanse of the galaxy below, unafraid. Loki, Thor shouted, reaching out again, but it was too late. Odin placed a steadying hand on Thor's shoulder. He did not hesitate or waver. He won't perish, the All-Father said quietly. Though Loki came to me by conquest rather than by blood, he is every bit my son, and this fall, it is what he needs most now. Thor closed his eyes for a moment, anguish and something like pride warring on his face. Above them, the rainbow bridge arched back into calm brilliance, carrying father and son safely toward Asgard's gates, while Loki's fate remained his own to claim. Thor looked up at his father, concern etched on his face. Why haven't you shared this with Loki, father? Odin sighed and leaned back on his throne. I did, but Loki's world has always been confined to these palace walls. He's never faced real hardship, so his views became skewed, and he simply wouldn't listen. Thor frowned. Still, he's done nothing truly unforgivable, just a bit of mischief. I couldn't expel him outright, like you once did to me. Exactly, Odin agreed. That's why this is a rare chance for him to leave Asgard, just for a time. Only by venturing into other realms, meeting new people, and confronting genuine challenges will he learn and grow. He placed a steady hand on Thor's shoulder. When you encounter Loki in distant worlds, show him kindness. He may seem full of malice towards strangers, but his loyalty to Asgard runs deep. Given the chance to understand himself, he will learn to protect the realm he calls home. Odin's eyes softened as he reflected on his younger son. Though Thor was the rightful heir, eldest and beloved by their people, Odin had always loved Loki too. Mischief might be in the boy's nature, but his heart was not without honor. To be Asgard's next king, you must win the people's hearts and prove your strength. Loki isn't of royal blood. Though Queen Frigga taught him magic to make up for it, his development has always lagged behind. He still needs many years of training before he can hope to rule. As for me, time is running out. My strength wanes with each passing day, and the realm cannot wait forever to select its leader. I'd always believed that if Damien succeeded me, I could finally retire in peace. But I never imagined Saul would betray us so completely. When he claimed the throne, he unleashed a trap of such magnitude that it drove me into the depths of Odin's sleep. And now, roused prematurely, the raw power coursing through my veins tears at my body. I sense my end approaching, and the thought fills me with quiet sorrow, but these burdens are mine alone to bear. All I hope for is to live long enough to witness a true reconciliation between Damien and Loki. I understand, Father. When Damien spoke those words, he felt the full weight of his father's hopes and fears. Odin paused at the edge of the courtyard, his voice low and steady. Thor, I must enter Odin's sleep for a time. Thor, hammer in hand, lowered his arm. Before you do, you said you wanted to speak. Odin nodded once and stepped forward. Yes, when I sent you down to Midgard to train, I expected hardship to teach you humility and purpose. Yet you've returned almost at once. What have you learned? What has changed? They walked side by side along the moss-carpeted path, the forge's glow fading behind them. Thor glanced at his father. I met people who helped me. 3 of them, no 4. Strangers who restored my power of thunder when it was lost. Odin's brow lifted in surprise. Allies on Midgard? You kept this from me? Thor shifted Mjolnir on his shoulder. I did. I felt indebted to them. Before coming home, I wanted to repay their kindness. Odin's expression softened as he regarded his son. You thought more of gratitude than of duty, Thor dipped his head. I learned that compassion can be as powerful as any war hammer. The All-Father considered this, then placed a hand on Thor's broad shoulder. Very well. Tell me of these 4 who aided the god of thunder. Thor drew a deep breath, ready at last to share the tale of friends made in Midgard's shadow. Bennett, Willow, Sawerse, and the quiet healer Eric each had played a part in restoring more than just his lightning. And so, beneath the waning light of Asgard's sky, Thor began to speak. Don't worry about it, Thor said, slipping Mjolnir back into its place. I managed to retrieve it faster than I expected. Odin leaned forward. Explain. Thor's gaze turned thoughtful. There are 2 ways to lift Mjolnir. The first is well known. You must possess a heart aligned with justice. The second is much darker. It's raw, overwhelming might, strength beyond anything we can imagine. At that, Odin opened his mouth to argue, but then thought of his eldest daughter, Hela. Even without his blessing, she could wrench the hammer from Thor's hand by sheer force. He said nothing. Who is this forceful contender? Odin asked at last. Saul stepped forward, his face grave in the torchlight. I know only fragments. His power is shrouded in mystery. Yet I watched with my own eyes as he tore the destroyer to pieces, barehanded. The only name I've ever heard is Damien Embalaka. A hush fell over the hall as Odin and Thor exchanged troubled looks. If such strength truly existed outside the realm of worthiness, the balance of Asgardian power might be at stake. Odin's voice trembled as he paced the length of the great hall. What do you mean Damien destroyed the destroyer? Thor met his father's gaze with unflinching seriousness. I saw it with my own eyes. Odin halted mid-stride, gripping the spear at his side. Are you sure you didn't merely deactivate it, that it wasn't just shut down? Thor shook his head. No, father. He obliterated it, completely. A heavy silence settled between them. At first, Odin could scarcely believe the claim, but as Thor repeated his words, the All-Father's face paled. Finally, he sank onto his throne, shock and dread etched in every line of his features. Thor nodded solemnly, aware of the fear reflected in his father's eyes, and of the terrible power Damien must possess to have done the impossible. Chapter 165, Too Anxious to Eat Hot Tofu. When did Blue Star pick up another heavyweight? Odin frowned. He knew his son wouldn't joke about this. After all, Loki had unleashed the destroyer, and Thor's safe return meant someone powerful must have intervened. Yet he'd never heard of Damien. Then he remembered. 2 years ago, an inexplicable figure had been surveying Asgard, but whenever Odin tried to trace him, the trail went cold. That mysterious observer must be the same person Saul had mentioned. "I'm not sure myself," Saul admitted, "but he's very famous in New York. It wouldn't be hard to track him down." Saul shook his head. "Tony said the man didn't really want to meet me, so looking for him would be a waste of time." Odin nodded thoughtfully. "That makes sense. He's worried about putting you in the crossfire, so he reached out through me instead. Now I understand why." Saul glanced at him, relief and curiosity warring in his eyes. He still wondered how Damien knew so much about him, and why he preferred to stay behind the curtain. Damien had always thought of himself as easygoing, but once he heard his father's warning, everything clicked into place. "Don't pry into his affairs," Odin said, his voice measured. "He doesn't want to be disturbed right now. If you leave him alone, he'll preserve his dignity, and he won't trouble you." Odin studied his son's face, then continued, "That being's willingness to protect me means that any contact you have with him will change you in some way. Whether those changes prove helpful or harmful, I can't say yet." Damien nodded thoughtfully. "Understood, but if he truly represents Blue Star, then nobody will dare cross us." Thor gave a approving nod. "Whether he's formally an envoy of Blue Star or not, the Supreme Mage there already handles enemies in the magical and spiritual realms. Here in Asgard, we're responsible for the material world, so it's an advantage to have his support." Odin placed a hand on Damien's shoulder. "One day you will ascend as king of Asgard. Never forget the importance of our alliance with Blue Star. At the very least, it ensures we can defend this realm against any physical threat." "Who is the Supreme Mage?" Damien asked, tilting his head as he tried to make sense of his father's words. Odin regarded him with calm, unblinking eyes. "She is an ancient sorceress, more than 1,000 years old." Damien's brow furrowed. "I always assumed the Supreme Mage was a man." "You'll meet her when the time is right," Odin replied. He paused, choosing his next words with care. "But do not seek her out on your own. Wait until she calls for you." "Why?" Damien pressed. "What's so dangerous?" Odin's face remained impassive. "There is a powerful force rising in the Blue Star realm, one that even the Supreme Mage cannot overcome alone. That is why she may need allies beyond her own order." He gave Damien a measured look. "That is all I can tell you for now." Damien nodded slowly. "You've already told me a great deal today, Father." Odin placed a firm hand on his son's shoulder. "You passed my test. Your claim to the throne grows stronger with every trial you endure. But I will rest now, and there are more lessons ahead." He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a quiet warning. "Never forget how vast the sky is, or how deep the earth runs. Do not let pride drive you to dig a hole you cannot climb out of." Damien met his father's steady gaze and nodded again, the weight of Odin's words settling over him as the torchlight flickered against the stone walls. "Before you take the throne, you must find a way to restore the Rainbow Bridge." When Odin spoke, Thor's swagger vanished. The prospect of kingship weighed on him, and he considered his father's words with uncharacteristic seriousness. "I'll see to the bridge's repair right away," Thor replied. "Meanwhile, I'll pilot the spacecraft and survey the realms beyond Blue Star." Odin nodded, placing a firm hand on his son's shoulder. "The collapse of the Bifrost has unsettled all 9 realms. Friction will Fufquell, lair, and war is a real danger. Your first task is to prevent those conflicts and bring peace." Thor met his father's gaze. "I'll do more than repair the bridge. I'll stop large-scale wars and prove I deserve this crown." "Excellent," Odin said. "Let the people witness both your strength and your judgment. But remember, you go not to conquer but to calm. Do not mistake force for leadership." As they walked together, Odin shared the final pieces of wisdom every king should know. Thor listened intently, outlining his hopes and plans to be a ruler worthy of Asgard. A few days passed. Tony Stark had spent the last week locked in his underground lab, poring over samples of Uru metal. Every analysis told the same story. Its crystalline structure was unlike any alloy he'd ever encountered. If he could figure out how to forge and wear it, he'd be virtually unstoppable, able to roam every corner of the Blue Star system without so much as a second thought for any adversary in the universe. Even Thor's hammer at full force could barely nick its surface. Uru was more than a mere material. It was like a built-in upgrade to the human form. But there was a problem. No matter how Tony tweaked his arc furnaces and plasma forges, he simply couldn't melt or recast Uru. It sat there in his workshop like a hoard of treasure he couldn't unlock. Frustrated, but not yet beaten, Tony made a decision. He needed help from someone with cutting-edge expertise in extreme metallurgy. He picked up his phone and dialed Damien. It was just past noon, hardly a time to worry about intruding on a friend's schedule. A few seconds later, Damien's holographic avatar materialized beside Tony's workbench, blueprints flickering in his eyes. "Tony," Damien greeted, voice calm as ever. "What's on your mind?" Tony pushed aside a handful of Uru slivers. "Damien, I've hit a wall. This metal's hardness and its melting point are off the charts. My furnaces can't even make a dent. I need a new approach to smelt and shape Uru, or all this effort's going nowhere. Can you help?" Damien studied the samples, his expression steady. "Let me think through the variables. If anyone can crack this, we can." As they bent over the glowing metal, two of the universe's greatest scientific minds joined forces, and Uru's secrets suddenly felt a lot more reachable. "Of course you can't use it." Damien stared at Tony, speechless. "But didn't you ask me to research Uru metal?" Tony nodded. "I asked you to study its properties, see if you could combine various elements to create a new alloy, something that would boost the hardness of your steel armor." "So how do we smelt it?" Damien pressed. "You can't," Tony said flatly. "To remelt and recast Uru, you need an energy source on the order of a neutron star. Only the dwarves have that kind of furnace." Damien's eyes widened. Uru metal was the legendary ore used for forging magical weapons, far stronger than vibranium. It was unthinkable that Tony could ever process it himself. "Their technology really is that advanced?" Tony shrugged. "Dwarves have been perfecting their crafts for millennia. Humanity, by comparison, has existed for barely a few centuries." Chapter 1. Catching Up, One Step at a Time. "I'm afraid it won't be that easy to bridge the gap," Tony said, leaning back in his chair. He studied the data flowing across the view screen. "When you compare humanity's current tech level to a true fourth-stage civilization, we're like infants just learning to crawl, nowhere near ready to sprint." Damien nodded, absorbing every word. Since the day he'd cracked open that stolen alien alloy sample, he'd been pushing himself to reverse engineer its properties. "Understood," he replied. "I'll start by synthesizing a base alloy that reproduces the same molecular lattice. From there, we can iterate." Tony allowed himself a small, approving smile. He'd been about to push Damien harder, plow ahead with quantum phase bonding right away, but he recognized the boy's determination and potential. "Good," he said. "But remember, baby steps. Master the fundamentals before you tackle the next leap." Damien turned back to the workstation, fingers flying over the controls as he adjusted pressure settings and input ratios. Tony watched him for a moment longer, then tapped the comm link. "Day 14 report complete," he said into the intercom. "And don't forget, hit that subscribe button if you want more updates." He hung up, confident that his protege was on the right track. On the 14th day of testing, with thousands of data points logged, Damien's experiment finally stabilized. Humanity might be crawling for now, but under Tony's guidance, it would learn to walk, and one day it would run among the stars. Chapter 166. Tony's Not Short of Funds. Tony sat at his workbench, staring at the alloy samples in front of him with growing frustration. No matter how many microstructures he tested, none met the strength and flexibility he needed. He tapped a finger against his temple, deep in thought, until his comm crackled to life. "Tony, I've been looking into stronger materials," Damien said. "Have you considered vibranium? It's only found on Blue Star, but if you follow Jarvis's protocols, you should be able to locate a supplier and purchase some." "Vibranium?" Tony echoed, brow furrowing. He tried to call up any memory of handling it in past simulations, but drew a blank. I've never actually worked with vibranium. How sure are you there's a seller out there? If you dig into Blue Star's trade networks, you'll find a contact, Damien replied. I've got to go, though. I'll leave the rest to you. With that, Damien ended the call. Tony nodded to himself, raising a hand toward the floating hollow form of Jarvis. Jarvis, run every database you can access for information on vibranium. As you wish, sir. Jarvis's voice was calm as always. Within seconds, the AI projected streams of data around Tony. 10 minutes later, Jarvis spoke again. Sir, the results are surprisingly sparse. There is only one reference to vibranium whose authenticity we cannot verify, and an unexpected entry concerning your late father, Mr. Stark. Tony's helmet clanged shut as he leaned forward, curiosity piqued. What entry? Jarvis paused, then continued in that steady tone. The entry includes correspondence between your father and an off-world consortium. It suggests he once negotiated the purchase of a novel alloy, and there's mention of vibranium by name. Tony's gauntleted hand hovered over the console. If his father had dealt with vibranium, it could unlock everything Tony needed. But it also raised questions. Why hadn't he known? And what had Mr. Stark been planning? Tony tapped the hollow interface. Pull up the full transcript. Let's see exactly what he was up to. As Jarvis complied, Tony felt a familiar charge of excitement. He was on the verge of a breakthrough, if he could just follow the trail his father left behind. Chapter X, the Vibranium Lead. Damien stood amid the humming hum of arc reactors and scattered metal shards in his workshop. Jarvis's calm voice cut through the silence. I've pulled together the files on that old vibranium shield you made for Captain America, Steve Rogers, to be exact. A sly smile curved Damien's lips. So the great Captain America is really standing on my shoulders, huh? I wonder how he'll like that little nugget. Jarvis projected the rest of the data onto a hovering hollow display. It's almost poetic. He preaches self-reliance, yet everything he does is built on someone else's work. Damien's amusement deepened. Even if he couldn't get his hands on fresh vibranium, he relished the thought of using this as a jab the next time Steve Rogers got too full of himself. He tapped a few controls. Is there any confirmation that this vibranium ended up on the black market? The file is old, and the trail's grown faint, Jarvis admitted. But I've pinpointed a few promising coordinates. If you investigate in person, you'll find out one way or another. Damien nodded. Excellent. Plot a course and activate the suit's stealth protocols. I'm going in. As Jarvis laid out the flight path and threat assessments, Damien turned back to the forge where his next-generation nanotech alloy waited. If this mysterious metal truly rivaled Uru, and no other substitute existed, he would perfect his design and push his armor's performance beyond any known limit. With resolve burning bright, Damien climbed into the workshop's launch cradle. The doors sealed, repulsors roared to life, and he shot skyward. Whatever lay ahead, he was more than ready. Stark's latest suit, crafted entirely from titanium alloy, gave him excellent mobility, but its defensive strength left something to be desired. At first, he'd been willing to accept the trade-off, speed over raw durability. But after his showdown with the Destroyer, Tony realized he needed a tougher armor if he was ever going to go toe-to-toe with truly powerful foes. Even if he couldn't perfect a new vibranium alloy, he resolved to build at least a handful of full vibranium suits and keep them on standby. Meanwhile, Damien sat across the table, casually enjoying his meal. He had no desire to meddle. Better to let Tony run his own race rather than risk derailing it. And Ultron? It really didn't concern him. Tony now had vast stores of vibranium, and if Tony came up with an idea, Ultron would inevitably bring it to life. If Tony had never dreamed up Ultron, then Ultron, and by extension Vision, would never exist, no matter what Damien did. And frankly, Damien didn't care whether Vision ever saw the light of day. As for that crazy Wanda Maximoff, he had no plans whatsoever to drag her into the void. Damien, the Watcher stationed in New York, had been monitoring Wanda closely. Her power and raw potential were unmistakable, but precisely because her abilities were so immense, her temperament remained fragile. At the first sign of emotional strain, she tended to shut everyone out. Damien feared that, should she ever plunge into despair, she'd abandon her moral codes without hesitation, all in pursuit of even greater strength. He'd also been tasked with locating Dr. Bruce Banner, the Hulk. But in July 2011, S.H.I.E.L.D. still hadn't tracked Banner down, so Damien wasn't in any rush. The real spectacle, whatever it might be, was bound to begin soon enough. After lunch, he climbed into his car and set off, intent on roaming the streets in search of beautiful women in need of help. On Blue Star, so long as S.H.I.E.L.D. left him be, life felt remarkably free. Meanwhile, Tony Stark had just acquired a derelict spacecraft and spent a small fortune dealing with a local arms broker to secure a massive cache of vibranium, far more than he strictly needed. For Tony, money was never the issue. Back at his lab, he immediately put the vibranium through a battery of tests, probing its resistance to extreme cold, determining its melting point, and even exploring possible ways to fracture the near-indestructible metal. After running countless simulations, Tony concluded there was only one solution: build Damien a vibranium suit. Vibranium's defense far outclasses that of his lightweight titanium alloy, but its greater mass and density seriously impair mobility. The breakthrough came from Tony's most advanced thrusters, which can propel even a suit as heavy as this. Its top speed will still lag behind the current titanium steel models, but considering how long it takes to replace a damaged suit in the field, durability wins out. Because of its weight, the vibranium armor can't accommodate many energy weapons. It's better suited to melee arms. Tony has already pushed the thrusters to their limit, and only someone with exceptional strength, like Damien, can operate the suit with any agility. For anyone less powerful, simply wearing it would be like wading through molasses. Still, when you need a heavy hitter to take on slow-moving but nearly indestructible foes, this suit will be unmatched. Damien's first prototype, an all-vibranium suit, let him revel in brutal hand-to-hand engagements with his enemies. Yet he soon realized a fatal flaw. Against someone like Renault, whose movements reached supersonic speeds, the suit only ensured he'd land hits, not avoid them. Renault would never pause for a clinch, no matter how hard Damien struck. Forced to rethink his material strategy, Damien shelved his ambitious plans for Eurosteel. He simply lacked the smelting technology needed to forge it. Instead, he refocused on completing the vibranium armor and then immediately set out to create a new alloy, one as lightweight as a high-grade titanium composite, but still boasting at least half the hardness of pure vibranium. He knew full well that, for now, nobody could perfectly meld vibranium's unmatched toughness with titanium's featherlight property. Is. A compromise was all he could hope for. Still, he couldn't predict how powerful his next adversary might be, so he resolved to cover every base. His recent showdown with the Destroyer had driven the point home. Damien had charged and unleashed his experimental void rays, only to watch them glance harmlessly off the enchanted plating. Frustrating as it was, the encounter had also revealed just how much raw potential the void held, potential he intended to harness in his next generation of defenses. Damien's evolutionary path was clear. He needed to develop his body and his void power in tandem. Although his physical condition was already impressive, he still couldn't match Renault's explosive speed or Kel's brute strength. His physique had to grow stronger. He'd seen firsthand what it meant to cross the universe by sheer physical force, and at a minimum, his body would have to reach that level. One day, he intended to travel into space. He wasn't about to risk some accident, leaving him helplessly adrift and freezing to death in the void. Chapter 167. 5 quiet months had slipped by since the Destroyer's last attack, and at last, the calendar turned to 2012. Tony Stark had poured over 3 months and countless prototypes into perfecting his first suit of vibranium armor. Coated in his trademark red and gold, the new design dwarfed his previous steel model. It stood a full 2.5 meters tall. Most striking were the massive crimson gauntlets and the 2-meter-long scarlet battle axe mounted on its back. The gauntlets served a dual purpose. They could unleash powerful void rays at a distance or deliver bone-shattering blows in close quarters. The axe, meanwhile, was built to obliterate heavy obstacles that conventional weapons couldn't touch. But all these enhancements came at a cost. The suit now weighed 10 tons. Even with Stark's most advanced thrusters, the specialized construction limited its top speed to just 100 meters per second. Tony could only break the sound barrier when swinging his 3-ton axe. Compared with the armor's Mach 6 top speed, that was a colossal difference. but one he'd anticipated. Vibranium isn't prized for flexibility, it's prized for its hardness and strength. Only Tony's incredible physical power and endurance allowed him to don the suit in the first place. Anyone lacking that raw strength wouldn't just struggle to heft a 3-ton scarlet axe. They wouldn't stand a chance wielding it in battle. After all, lifting a weapon is one thing. Actually fighting with it is quite another. Still, Tony didn't always need the axe. By activating the suit's charge mode, he could smash through everyday objects as if they were paper. Lately, Blue Star had been eerily quiet, save for the routine gunfights that plagued New York's streets. Before he knew it, the new year had arrived, and Tony found himself wondering why Damien insisted he wouldn't be able to slip away anytime soon. Tony hovered by the viewport, restless. "Jarvis," he said, voice tight, "you told me Damien said I can't leave Blue Star for the time being." Jarvis's calm tone filled the chamber. "That's correct, sir." "Does that ban include the vibranium research I'm planning?" On the eve of 2012, Tony's unease had grown into certainty. Something wasn't right. He rubbed his forehead and pressed, "I need answers. Did Damien really forbid all departure, even for scientific work?" "I'm afraid so," Jarvis replied. "You know how powerful Mr. Damien is. He understands things beyond even my comprehension. When he said you couldn't leave, it wasn't a casual order. It applies to all matters, research included." Tony ran a hand through his hair. Jarvis had read his underlying frustration. Ever since Pepper had agreed to accompany him off-world, she'd grown closer to him, far more attentive and more beautiful by the day. And yet, she knew Tony well enough to turn a blind eye when he chased after fleeting romantic distractions across the galaxy. But Blue Star was off limits. Even Pepper, with all her tolerance, refused to grant Tony permission to pursue any wild flowers there. Tony sighed and sank onto the nearest console. No vibranium, no shuttle flights. Not yet, at least. Not until Damien decides otherwise. He stared at the stars beyond the glass, determined to find a way around this unexpected blockade. Pepper never pressed Tony for every last detail of his cosmic adventures. She knew that outside Blue Star he could afford to be bold and freewheeling, but here at home he owed everyone honesty and responsibility. It was common knowledge that Pepper didn't quite match Tony's raw power. He'd win any straight-up fight. But if she lost her temper, she could level the entire manor in minutes. Let things spiral out of control, and it would be a disaster. After Tony completed the vibranium armor, he confessed to her more than once how badly he wanted to slip back into the universe, visit Renoli and Kyle, show off his latest inventions, breathe the open air of distant worlds. Yet Damien's firm warning kept him grounded. Tony was terrified of what might happen to Blue Star if he left on a war. Him. "I'd give anything to go," Tony sighed, running a hand through his hair. "It's maddening to create the most advanced tech in the galaxy and have nowhere to test it." All year long, Sonia had paid him his quarterly stipend without fail, but for the last 3 payments, every credit went straight to repaying his debts to Damien, leaving his account all but empty. Now that the new year has arrived, the 4th installment of the grant, over 700 million credits, landed in his account. Credits in the far reaches of the universe were worth far more than anything on Blue Star. With that sum, Tony could indulge a lifetime's daydreams of interstellar romances, but he didn't dare leave yet. The thought weighed on him like a dark cloud. Across town, Damien was positively elated. Freed from the burdens of Cassidon's identity, he could once again savor the simple joys and romance he'd known on Blue Star. And make no mistake, romance aside, Damien's reputation was rock solid. He'd helped countless people, always there with advice or a lending hand. Whenever his name came up, it was met with nothing but praise. Tony heard the accolades all the time, and he couldn't help feeling a twinge of envy. Pepper's decision to join the Void was a blessing for Tony, too. He'd have a devoted partner at his side for years to come. The only drawback was that, with Pepper around, he had to curb his impulsive habit of dashing out for late-night snacks. "Sir?" Jarvis's calm voice interrupted his thoughts. "Mr. Damien advises that now is not the time for you to depart." Tony sighed, running a hand through his hair. "All right, I'll wait a little longer." He squared his shoulders, resolve firming. "Starting today, I'll dedicate myself to studying nanotechnology." Jarvis gave a quiet acknowledgement. Tony met the AI's tone, and in that moment, he felt ready for whatever came next. Damien watched Tony Stark's progress with both awe and impatience. Over the past months, Stark had dissected every nuance of Wakanda's vibranium armor, and the results were nothing short of spectacular. His own strength and ingenuity had leapt forward in tandem. Yet Tony knew that merely matching his rival wasn't enough. He needed to outpace her. His next goal, evolving his traditional steel chassis into a fully integrated nano-armor, one that could adapt to any threat in real time. He reminded himself how deceptive the road of science could be. There is no finish line, because both wisdom and time are finite. Even if Tony perfected the nano-armor tomorrow, he would have only reached the next milestone, not the end of his journey. Blue Star's ultimate dream was to push humanity beyond Earth's cradle and into the stars. That ambition demanded breakthroughs in propulsion, life support, artificial intelligence. Countless avenues of research still lay ahead. Most people might have thrown up their hands at the sheer scale of it all, but Tony's deal with the Void guaranteed him not just resources, but precious extra years to chase every last secret of advanced technology. As 2012 dawned, Damien sat at his console each morning, scanning the digital overlay of New York City for any sign of Bruce Banner. Stark and Banner were intellectual peers, two brilliant minds shaped by very different fates. Bruce's life had been darker, his inner demons far more dangerous than Tony's. Bruce's temper was legendary, his alter ego, the Hulk, a walking paradox of rage and fragility. Damien couldn't help but wonder, what would happen if Tony ever tapped into that power? It was a terrifying thought, one that lingered at the back of his mind every time the red glow of the Stark Industries logo appeared on his screen. Damien was convinced that Tony Stark would never let the power inside him run wild. Instead, he'd learn to master it. Bruce Banner, on the other hand, was so terrified of the Hulk that he'd even entertained the idea of killing himself just to destroy the monster within. Damien couldn't make sense of it. Banner wasn't afraid of dying, so why refuse to at least try accepting and controlling the force coursing through his own veins? Shaking his head, Damien finalized his report and clicked send. The third update had just gone out. Chapter 168, the beginning of the Avengers Alliance. Damien sat alone in the dim glow of the observation deck, his thoughts drifting over a simple truth. Power itself is neither good nor evil. Its morality depends entirely on the one who wields it. Countless souls long for great strength, yet few truly grasp the burden that accompanies it. He thought of Bruce Banner. Beneath the gentle scientist lay a force capable of leveling mountains. Banner's fear of losing control had driven him to suppress every spark of anger, hoping to keep the Hulk locked away forever. But Damien knew that denial wasn't the answer. Banner needed to learn mastery over his rage, transforming impossible might into a force for good, rather than fearing the monster within. He could locate Banner at any moment, but now wasn't the right time to make contact. Patience was their greatest ally. So long as Banner remained in the shadows, Damien was certain that Loki would follow, Mind Stone in hand, scheming to tip the scales in his favor. There was no need to rush. Still, Damien wondered if Loki would dare stage another public spectacle after the Hulk had dismantled the Destroyer in a blaze of emerald fury. Yet chaos was the trickster's nature. Attention and theatrics fueled him. Damien leaned forward, anticipation lining his face. He couldn't wait to see what Loki would unleash next. Meanwhile, in the training hall of the nascent Avengers headquarters, Steve Rogers yanked off his gauntlet and refastened it with renewed determination. Tony Stark's parting jab had stung. If you're going to lead this team, Cap, you better prove you've earned it. Since then, Rogers had thrown himself into drills with an almost frantic intensity, running obstacle courses, perfecting hand-to-hand combat, poring over strategy simulations far into the night. He would not let doubt tarnish his reputation. Across the complex, Black Widow tightened her stance, Hawkeye drew his bow, and Thor tested the balance of his hammer. Slowly, from these disparate talents, a single purpose was emerging, to stand against any threat, no matter how formidable. Damien watched them all. Banner's hidden potential, Loki's inevitable return, Rogers' relentless drive, and realized this was the true beginning of the Avengers Alliance. When chaos descended, they would answer the call together, and this time they would not falter. Damien's strength had now reached 5 tons, more than twice what it was before. Though he still didn't know when he'd next confront Tony, Steve felt a fierce anger burning inside him. The next time they met, he vowed he would prove once and for all the supremacy of flesh and blood over cold machinery. Time flew, and in the blink of an eye it was already March. Deep within a shield, secret underground laboratory, the Cosmic Cube, long in the agency's possession, had finally met someone capable of studying it. With Dr. Eric newly on board, the team had made real progress. Then, without warning, the cube's once stable energy readings began to spike unpredictably. Director Nick Fury hurried into the containment chamber. "Doctor, what's happening?" Dr. Eric didn't look up from the monitor. "The cube has activated itself for reasons we can't identify. Its power flux is off the charts, and we have no way to predict what comes next." Fury's eyes narrowed. "You're joking." Eric shook his head. "I wish I were, but the data don't lie." He paused only a moment before returning to the console, fingers flying over the controls as he fought to bring the Tesseract's volatile energies back under control. "Where's Agent Patton?" Nick Fury demanded the moment Eric finished speaking. "Up there," Eric replied, pointing over his shoulder toward the ceiling. He swallowed hard. "I don't know what happened. The power of the cosmic cube just surged again." A young researcher to Eric's side cried out in alarm. Simultaneously, the cosmic cube began to tremble, pulsing with flickers of electric blue energy. Fury and Hawkeye both instinctively backed away. "Stay sharp," Fury ordered. Hawkeye nodded grimly, knocking an arrow to his bowstring. Then, with a deafening rumble, the entire facility shook as the cube's glow intensified. A brilliant sapphire light burst from its core, coalescing into a perfect circular portal overhead. The lab, and everyone in it, was bathed in that ethereal blue radiance, as if they'd been plunged into another world. Nobody dared breathe. After weeks of frantic study, Eric had concluded that the cosmic cube's true function was to open a gateway to some distant point in the universe. But with so little time to analyze its complex energy signature, he hadn't been able to calculate where or when that destination might be. For that reason, they'd never run a controlled experiment. And now, with the portal winking into existence above them, there was no turning back. Damien stood at the edge of the lab's control pit, eyes glued to the flickering readouts. The cosmic cube had suddenly powered up on its own, its raw energy surging through the underground facility in unpredictable pulses. No one could say what, or who, it might attract. Then, as the last of the blue crackles died away, a figure appeared at the center of the room. A tall man with long, dark hair that tumbled around his shoulders, and in his hand a golden scepter that seemed to hum with power. He wore a fitted, green and gold tunic that caught the lab's harsh lights, and on his lips was an odd, confident smile. In an instant, every S.H.I.E.L.D. operative snapped to attention, weapons raised. Hawkeye had already climbed up on a support beam, an arrow notched and ready to fire. Nick Fury stormed forward, hand on his sidearm, eyes narrowed. Damien's pulse spiked. He and the other agents were surrounded, every exit covered. But the stranger didn't hesitate, or even seem afraid. Instead, he let that sinister smile widen. "Sir," Damien called, lifting his pistol. "Lower your weapon." The man's smile deepened. Fury took a cautious step forward. "Who are you? What do you want?" he demanded. Without answering, the newcomer raised his scepter. In a heartbeat, a shock wave exploded outward, cracking concrete and sending dust raining from the ceiling. Hawkeye leapt from his perch, hitting the floor hard and dragging Fury down to safety, just as the blast washed over them. Damien dove behind a console, firing wildly as debris skittered past. Bullets and automatic fire slashed through the gloom, but to Damien's astonishment, the scepter glowed with a protective field, and the round simply disintegrated against it. From across the room, the stranger, Loki, Damien realized, recalling old Asgardian lore, laughed softly. With a casual bound, he cleared the wreckage in one stride, scepter at the ready. "Stand down," Loki said, voice smooth as silk. "You're meddling in things you can neither understand nor control." Fury pulled himself up, flanked by Damien and Hawkeye. "You'll do no such thing," he snarled. "S.H.I.E.L.D. won't let you take that cube." Loki's eyes glittered. "Then you leave me no choice." Before anyone could react, the scepter flared, and the air rippled with magic. Damien braced himself, heart thundering, as world-altering power threatened to tear the laboratory apart, and with it, everyone in it. Loki's assault turned S.H.I.E.L.D.'s laboratory into utter chaos. In less than 10 minutes, the reinforced walls began to buckle, and the entire facility trembled on the verge of collapse. Nick Fury, shielded by a team of agents, dove behind cover and immediately grabbed his secure comm. "I want all units on red alert. Avengers to the lab, now." At Stark Industries' adjacent hangar, Tony Stark and Pepper Potts were about to board a prototype jet when Fury's call lit up Tony's wrist display, deploying war machine armor. Without missing a beat, Tony slammed his palm against a console. Hydraulic servos groaned and armored segments shot into the air, magnetically snapping around his body until he stood encased in gleaming silver and red plating. He tapped the comm. "If you're waking me for anything less than Armageddon, I swear." "Save it, Stark," Fury cut in, his voice tense. "Loki's ripping through our main lab. We've got structural breaches, injured agents, you name it. Get suited up and move out, immediately." The last panel slid into place. Tony's frustration gave way to steel-edged determination. "On my way." He turned to Pepper, checked his HUD, and sprinted for the hangar doors, where debris and alarm sirens painted a grim welcome. Somewhere below, the God of Mischief was laying waste to all of S.H.I.E.L.D.'s finest work, and Tony Stark was racing into the storm. Nick Fury's voice crackled through the secure line. "The cosmic cube we've been studying has spawned a new adversary." Tony Stark sat up. "What do you mean, spawned? What can this thing do?" Fury's tone was grim. "It can cloud people's minds, and it's already taken control of Agent Clint Barton, Hawkeye. And get this, he's invulnerable. Bullets bounce right off him." Stark whistled. "That's not a threat you mess around with. Do we have any description? A face to put on this guy?" Fury ran a hand through his hair. "Our research lab was destroyed in the initial breach. All the footage, the surveillance, gone. No portraits, no photos. We don't even know what he looks like." A grim smile played on Stark's lips. "Then it's time to call in the big guns. I'm assembling the Avengers. If this is a universe-crossing threat, we meet it head-on. You promised me we'd go into this together." "Location?" Fury snapped. "Riviera Station, 0800 hours, 2 days from now," Stark replied without hesitation. "Coordinates are on your secure feed," Fury confirmed. Stark tapped his HUD. "That's the 4th update. Let's see how the rest of them stack up." He leaned back, eyes gleaming. "Avengers, assemble." Chapter 169, They Won't Give Us Time. "Pepper, don't worry," Tony said, voice calm but resolute. Pepper Potts studied him for a moment, then relaxed. "You sound different. You don't seem like the same man you were before." Tony set aside his helmet, revealing a confident smile on his familiar, chiseled face. "Exactly. I've changed." She returned his smile. "Good to know. But did Mr. Damien foresee all this? Is that why he wanted you to stay on Blue Star?" "JRVS." Soft voice replied from the console. "Given Mr. Damien's talents, it is entirely plausible." Tony chuckled. "Well, I'm grateful he did. If I'd blasted off into deep space only to come home and find my base in ruins, I'd never forgive him." He began peeling off the armor plates, each piece clicking free until only the chest arc reactor remained. Finally unburdened, Tony stretched, a surge of relief and readiness flowing through him. Facing an enemy onslaught was never easy, but this time he felt almost eager. Strength and confidence radiated from him. Tony glanced at the tactical display. "By the way, it looks like S.H.I.E.L.D. plans to bring the Hulk into this fight." "Indeed, sir," JRVS confirmed. Tony set his jaw, fueling himself on anticipation. They might not have a moment's peace, but with allies like that, they wouldn't need one. "Are you talking about Bruce Banner? The guy with terrifying power who's too scared to unleash it and can't even control it?" Tony Stark leaned forward in his chair. If Jarvis could really track Banner, no military cover-up would slip by his sensors. Of course, Tony knew exactly who the Hulk was. "That's the one," he said. Jarvis replied smoothly. "If we can secure him, this Avengers team might finally live up to its name." Tony smiled. Without the Hulk, the Avengers had talent but lacked true brute force. Hawkeye, Black Widow, Captain America, they were invaluable against earthbound threats. But against invulnerable cosmic enemies, they'd be lucky just to survive, let alone win. With Banner's transformation into the Hulk, however, everything changed. Even if Banner couldn't fully rein in the Hulk's rage, A simple shift in form and a clear battleground were all it took. Tony's files confirmed it. The Hulk was virtually impervious and capable of ripping tanks to shreds. On a universal scale, he was exactly the kind of powerhouse the team needed. Bruce Banner is terrified of his own power, let alone the thought of using it. Tony understands that fear. As Damien pointed out, Banner dreads being treated like some kind of alien, and he's convinced that if he ever transforms, he'll lose control and destroy everything around him. Tony's resolve is simple. He will make Banner see that even if the Hulk does go on a rampage, the Avengers have the means to bring him down. Once Banner knows he's not alone, that he has teammates ready to step in, his fear of his own strength will fade. Tony isn't sure just how formidable their next opponent will be, but he's not overly worried. Given the alien invasion Damien described, this new enemy is likely the same mysterious force that struck Blue Star. It's a very different threat from the destroyer they faced before, which had only intervened without permission and, had it truly wanted to, would have slain Thor and retreated. Tony has no regrets about stepping in back then. He walked away with a piece of Uru metal, and more importantly, Thor's friendship. He does wonder what Saul has been up to. It's been more than half a year since the last time Saul dropped by Blue Star, and Tony can't shake the feeling that something big is on the horizon. Tony replayed Thor's words in his mind. The Thunder God could zip between Asgard and Blue Star hundreds of times a day. If that kind of interdimensional travel could extend to Earth, Thor would effectively gain instant access to any corner of the universe. No wonder he rarely stayed in one place long enough to comment on Soul's fate. He was probably bouncing through uncharted realms right now. If the Avengers could convince Thor to join, Tony thought they'd finally have the firepower to defend Blue Star. His armor and the Hulk's muscle were formidable, but against truly cosmic threats, they might not be enough. Still, Tony wasn't panicking. Blue Star boasted its own champions, the Ancient One's mystic arts and King Odin's divine authority. And then there was Damien, gruff and aloof, but 10 times deadlier than most. He barely acknowledged the planet until someone dared to bomb his childhood home. Then, Tony knew, Damien would make sure the attackers regretted ever showing up. Of course, dragging the battle back to New York could cost innocent lives. But letting an enemy entrench itself on Blue Star would spell consequences far worse than any local tragedy. Better to accept a few small losses now than suffer an irreparable defeat down the line. That was the sort of trade-off even Tony Stark could live with. The next morning, Nick Fury strode onto the S.H.I.E.L.D. training grounds with a single purpose: find Steve Rogers. He knew Tony Stark's faith in S.H.I.E.L.D. was all but gone. Trying to issue orders to the Armored Avenger was a non-starter. If Fury needed real firepower, one hero stood out next to Tony, Captain America himself. He found Steve at the heavy bag, gloves on, hammering away. Rogers had been pushing himself harder than ever these past weeks. Fury had reports that not only had his strength returned to its World War II peak, it had surpassed it. Against this universe-spanning threat, they'd rely on men like him. Only if it absolutely came to that would Fury sanction nukes or mushroom warheads. Anything bigger would devastate the surrounding cities and inflict unacceptable civilian casualties. Fury leaned against the gym door. The enemy this time isn't from Earth. Steve paused mid-swing. With a crack, the bag snapped back and nearly toppled him. He turned, eyes narrowing. You're saying they came here through, what, a dimensional breach? I wish I was kidding, Fury said, his voice low. Steve pulled off his gloves, set them aside. Then we'd better get the rest of the team ready. If they're from another universe, we're dealing with threats we've never even imagined. Fury nodded. I've already alerted Stark, and I'm bringing in Damien on recon. He'll brief you on what we know so far. Steve cracked a half-smile. All right, let's suit up. We've got a universe to defend. Chapter 7. Blue Star has drawn the attention of other civilizations across the cosmos. Nick Fury stood at the head of the sleek conference table aboard the S.H.I.E.L.D. helicarrier, arms folded. The hollow projection hovered in midair, depicting the swirling energies of the cosmic cube and the newly revealed gateway to Blue Star. There could be enemies waiting on the other side, he warned. Damien Donovan, genius physicist, reluctant hero, studied the image with a frown. He ran a hand through his dark hair. We only intended to examine the cube's properties, he said firmly. We never meant to activate it. Fury's eyes narrowed. Our sensors recorded an unauthorized activation sequence. Someone unknown, opened the portal. Damien exhaled sharply. That wasn't our doing. If we'd powered it up, we'd have seen it in our logs. Exactly my point, Fury replied. The cosmic cube is far too dangerous for casual research. He took a step closer. Right now, it's beyond anything we can safely control. Damien's shoulders sagged as he admitted, I know. I was hoping we could at least refine our instruments before diving deeper. Give us time to catch up. Time? Fury barked. You think the rest of the universe will grant us a grace period? Other civilizations won't wait while we sharpen our pencils. What are you saying? Damien's voice was calm, but edged with frustration. That we should rush headlong into something none of us fully understand. Fury shook his head. I'm saying we don't have the luxury of choice. The moment we opened the door to Blue Star, every interstellar power out there took notice. Some of them see us as competitors, others as threats. Damien's gaze returned to the swirling energies of the cube. And Stark? Tony's here for this briefing? He's en route, Fury confirmed. He'll want a full readout before we decide our next move. Damien met Fury's eyes. Then he'll back me on this. We can't risk tearing the fabric of space-time or inviting an alien armada just because we're curious. Fury paused, studying Damien's determined expression. Finally, he nodded once. All right, you'll have Stark's support, but understand this. If we don't find a way to stabilize that portal, and fast, we may not get another chance. A tense silence filled the room as the hologram flickered. Outside, the helicarrier hummed through the sky, carrying with it the fate of Earth, and perhaps the entire galaxy. Damien swallowed hard, squared his shoulders, and whispered to himself, Then let's make every second count. Where should we assemble? Tony asked, glancing at the others. At the sound of his name, Steve's expression darkened for a moment before he answered coolly, Just stick with me. Nick Fury watched them both with a faint, knowing smile. He followed every subtle exchange between Steve and Tony, fully aware of the tension that simmered beneath their professional veneer. That's the 5th update. If you enjoyed it, please don't forget to vote. Chapter 170, Mutual Assessments. Tony's schedule had never been more packed, and he'd adopted a remarkably low profile, rarely leaving Stark Manor. If he didn't want visitors, Steve would have to insist just to get a meeting, and Steve, despite their occasional tensions, would never barge in uninvited. Nick Fury knew that, so he was confident Steve wouldn't pass up this unusual chance to liaise with the Avengers. I've got another engagement, Fury said. I'll arrange for someone to drive you there. He ushered Steve into a black SUV. Fury glanced over and asked, First stop, the politicians. Steve gave a wry smile. He'd learned long ago how those career officials could chew you up and spit you out. That's part of it. We've also got to meet some high-ranking military brass. Don't worry, Fury replied with a steady confidence. I'll handle all the introductions. They won't give you any trouble. He paused, letting his words sink in. The Avengers were a remarkable team of superpowered individuals, each with a distinct personality, yet all fiercely assured in their own abilities. In simple terms, he's arrogant, but fortunate enough to be willing to help. If politicians or the military were allowed to meddle, the brand new Avengers team would crumble instantly. That's why Nick Fury is adamant. No political oversight when it comes to Avengers business. As long as they don't tie my hands, he said, I don't care who thinks they're in charge. But that's easy for you to say, Steve replied with a wry smile. S.H.I.E.L.D. was founded by Peggy Carter, and he'd willingly dedicated himself to its cause, undertaking every assignment with the freedom to act on his own judgment. If anyone ever tried to control his decisions for personal gain, he'd walk away and enjoy a quiet retirement instead. He had no taste for servitude to politicians who pulled strings behind the scenes. I understand, Fury nodded. Moments later, their car rolled to a stop. Fury disembarked abruptly, leaving 2 agents to escort Steve deeper into the base. They wound through secure corridors until they reached a cavernous hangar. Under the harsh overhead lights stood a fighter jet unlike anything Steve had ever seen before, sleek, imposing, and clearly built for more than just aerial reconnaissance. Agent Phil Coulson stepped forward with a practiced smile. Captain Rogers, good to see you. I'm Agent Coulson. Steve Rogers nodded and accepted the tablet Coulson held out. Thanks. What do you have for me? Latest intel on the Avengers, plus reports of some strange supernatural phenomena on Blue Star, Coulson explained, nodding toward the jet. Have a look. It'll be critical for our next mission. Let's board. We're about 50 minutes out from S.H.I.E.L.D. headquarters. Steve climbed into the fighter jet and settled into the passenger seat. Coulson tapped his comlink. Coulson to S.H.I.E.L.D. Command. Rendezvous with Steve Rogers is complete. ETA to HQ. 50 minutes. Copy that, Coulson, came the crisp reply. Steve propped the tablet on his lap and swiped through the files. Though he'd been out of the loop for a while, the interface felt familiar. The first dossier he opened was on Dr. Bruce Banner, better known as the Hulk. Banner's power levels were off the charts. Damien leaned back in his chair, headphones on, as the briefing video began. The narration was blunt. The Hulk's invulnerability made him immune to every bullet and shell in the modern arsenal, and his strength was off the charts. On paper, he was a perfect weapon, but there was a catch. His power was completely uncontrollable. The footage that followed spoke volumes. In one clip, anti-tank sniper rounds pinged harmlessly off the Hulk's massive frame. The narrator dryly noted that if even those rounds couldn't penetrate him, the only thing that could was sheer kinetic deflection, Damien's own vibranium shield. That video made him pause and click rewind. Next came raw battlefield clips. Well-armed infantry squads swarming the Hulk like they were chasing a charging rhino. Every rifle, every grenade, a rocket launcher. Nothing even slowed him down. When an armored unit rolled in and fired a cannon round point blank, the Hulk merely braced himself, took it on the shoulder, and then let out a roar that rattled windows half a mile away. Rather than subduing him, it only seemed to stoke his fury. But the real showstopper was the tank footage. Under the Hulk's hands, a 60-ton battle tank looked like wet clay. He bent the barrel as if it were a metal rod, then smashed it flat with backhanded blows. In a matter of seconds, what had been a state-of-the-art war machine was nothing more than twisted wreckage. Damien shut off the feed, heart pounding. He knew he was looking at something unprecedented, raw power with no off switch. And if the Hulk ever lost control, well, there might not be anything left to save. Damien had made it his business to learn about modern military hardware. After all, fitting into 21st century society meant knowing more than just old textbooks. He understood that today's main battle tanks could shrug off direct hits from high-caliber artillery. Yet in the footage playing before him, the Hulk's single full-force charge sent a 20-ton armored behemoth soaring like a paper airplane. A monster with that kind of raw power. And he was one of the Avengers? Damien frowned. Could Bruce Banner really be powerless to rein him in? He hit pause and looked up at Agent Phil Coulson. So Banner isn't trying to control the Hulk at all? He actually wants to destroy him? Coulson ran a hand over his stubbled jaw. That's our assessment. Banner's refusal to, at the very least, contain the Hulk means S.H.I.E.L.D. can't determine whether his power is controllable. Damien let out a low whistle. He returned to his tablet and flipped through the dossier. Until now, he'd only skimmed the Avengers' bios, titles, abilities, mission stats. He'd never seen them in action. Even these brief clips revealed details no profile sheet ever could. The Hulk's raw, seismic impact, the precise moment tanks crumpled under his charge. Silent in the darkened briefing room, Damien realized just how high the stakes really were. Damien leaned back in his chair, watching the dossiers on his screen. Black Widow and Hawkeye, two of S.H.I.E.L.D.'s top agents, gave him little pause. Against his own abilities, they were practically ordinary. A small, satisfied smile tugged at his lips. At least he wasn't completely outclassed. That confidence dissolved the moment he opened Tony Stark's file. His eyes narrowed as the data loaded. A video snapped into view, a gleaming red and gold suit soaring through the sky at Mach 2. The timestamp blinked, 2008, clearly the earliest footage of Iron Man. Damien hit next, and the screen flickered through more clips. Stark piloting his armored suit alone into Taliban territory, carving a path through heavily armed terrorists, emerging unscathed as if gravity and bullets were mere inconveniences. The suit's performance was staggering, Missiles glanced off its surface, machine gun fire vanished into repulsor blasts, and the lone pilot moved with inhuman speed and precision. The terrorists, bristling with automatic rifles and rocket launchers, never stood a chance. AS Shield, analyst's annotation scrolled across the bottom of the video. Iron armor is the pinnacle of humanoid warfare technology, at least 2 to 3 decades ahead of current capabilities. Damien shut off the monitor and ran a hand through his hair. The data files had been arriving in drips and drabs for 2 weeks now. Tomorrow would mark the 15th day, and the moment S-Shield released its first official update on Iron Man. He knew the world was about to change all over again. Chapter 171, Can I Go Back? Damien sat forward, eyes glued to the screen. The combat prowess on display was nothing short of terrifying. One man standing firm against a horde of foes. He couldn't help recalling Tony's cutting remark during their last sparring session. "You're too weak." Even so, that wasn't his primary concern just now. What caught Damien's attention was the date stamp on the opening clip. 2008, Afghanistan. The same footage of Tony Stark taking out terrorists. If Stark's first Iron Man suit was already formidable then, there was no doubt in Damien's mind that the genius inventor must have iterated on it relentlessly over the past few years. The next video loaded with a click, jumping ahead 2 years to June 8, 2010. But instead of Stark, the frame opened on a striking blonde figure clad in ancient, rune-etched armor and a crimson cape. In his hand gleamed a massive hammer. The setting, a windswept beach, breakers crashing against dark shale under gathering storm clouds. Opposite the warrior towered a 3-meter-tall monstrosity of metal, jagged plates, pistons, and servos fused into something inhuman. Lightning flickered in the sky, then suddenly struck the hammerhead. The blond man didn't flinch. He raised his weapon high, and the thunder obeyed his will. Bolts lanced from hammer to creature, shuddering through its iron limbs until it collapsed in a shower of sparks and twisted steel. Damien's heart pounded. If Stark's suit had evolved so dramatically, what other wonders lay hidden in this world? And where, if anywhere, did he belong amid these legends? Steve sat rigid in his fighter's cockpit as the feed on his screen showed Damien, the striking blonde warrior, locked in combat with a hulking metal monster. Their clash unleashed a storm of energy so fierce it seemed beyond anything a mere mortal could withstand. Then the display split. A top-down view popped up alongside Damien's perspective. Before Damien could finish the fight, Tony Stark's alert hit Stark Manor, over 100 kilometers from the battlefield. In an instant, the billionaire genius suited up in his Iron Man armor and rocketed skyward. Within seconds, the Mark suit accelerated to Mach 6. The sonic boom rolled through the skies like thunder, rattling Steve's cockpit and setting every gauge trembling. In just over a minute, Stark's steel-clad figure streaked across the horizon and dropped into the fray beside Damien. The two fighters, clearly longtime comrades, moved with seamless coordination. Together, they forced the metal behemoth onto the defensive, buying precious time before delivering the next decisive blow. Damien watched in stunned silence as Tony's armor unleashed a 100-meter-wide purple beam that cleaved a canyon through the ocean's surface, yet still failed to penetrate the metal monster's defenses. He had no clue what this metal monster was, but the footage made one thing clear. Tony's suit was a marvel of engineering, light years ahead of any human technology. Even if they'd rained down nuclear warheads on it, Tony would have detected them in advance and evacuated. And still, this creature's power outstripped everything Tony could muster, and everything Damien could even imagine. Just when it seemed the battle was unwinnable, the sky ripped open with a swirling black-violet vortex. A tall, dark-haired man stepped through, calm and composed. With nothing but his bare hands, he tore the metal monster limb from limb, and then quietly disappeared back into the rift. "Who is this guy who just tore through that thing?" Damien blurted out, eyes wide. "Is he another Avenger?" He'd prided himself on being formidable by modern standards, but against whatever force had dispatched the metal monster so effortlessly, Damien felt utterly powerless. Damien Ambalaka's raw numbers were staggering. He could lift 5 tons, sprint 45 meters in a single second, and shrug off ordinary bullets without a scratch. In the context of modern human capabilities, he was already in a league of his own. Yet when you stacked him against he heavy hitters of the Avengers, against the Hulk's brute strength or Tony Stark's armored might, Damien suddenly seemed fragile by comparison. Even his virtually indestructible vibranium shield would offer little defense against the speed and firepower of a fully armed Iron Man. If Stark had set out to kill him, Damien wouldn't have had a chance to dodge. It would have been over in an instant. What gave them pause, though, was not Stark's cutting-edge technology. Those systems were well documented, with every arc reactor and repulsor ray traceable back to Stark Industries. No, it was the display of power at the end of their briefing that left everyone speechless. A young man, Damien Ambalaka himself, had stepped forward and, with nothing but his bare hands, ripped a walking metal construct to pieces in seconds. Captain Steve Rogers, hardened by decades of combat, could only stand there, mouth agape, utterly unable to rationalize what he'd just witnessed. It was in that stunned silence that the Avengers realized the truth. Damien Ambalaka wasn't just another superpowered operative. He was the most dangerous individual ever encountered on Blue Star, an unpredictable force whose full capabilities still lay shrouded in mystery. He's got enough power to obliterate the entire United States on his own. If he ever suited up with the Avengers, Blue Star would be untouchable, even against the fiercest cosmic threats. Unfortunately, he's never been one of us. In fact, he still holds a serious grudge against S.H.I.E.L.D. from some old run-in. Bottom line, you don't want to cross him, or even get in his way. Agent Coulson watched Steve's gaze flick to the lone figure on the surveillance feed. He paused, then spoke quietly. Damien, you don't mean Damien Abernathy, the New York billionaire? Steve frowned, uncertain. I've seen that face before. It was no coincidence he was the last person on that video. Coulson nodded. Damien and Tony Stark go way back. We lost most of the audio, but everything points to him arriving on that beach just to confront the metal monstrosity that was driving everyone into despair. So Stark must have called him in, Steve murmured, eyes narrowing. Coulson's expression darkened. Exactly. And whatever his mission was, we weren't on the invite list. Is it too late for me to return to my own era? Steve Rogers rose from the Quinjet's cramped bench and began pacing the cabin. He'd just confirmed what no one in the present era believed possible. Standing before him was Damien Ambalaka, the very man whose deeds had once defined an age. Historians had even named an era after him, but that was centuries ago. Now, in 2012, Steve found himself awakened from decades of suspended animation into a world that had sprinted light years beyond his last memory. Across the globe, S.H.I.E.L.D's so-called Blue Star program had developed weapons and defenses far deadlier than anything Steve had ever faced. He still carried his trusty vibranium shield, an artifact of his former life, but its familiar reassurance felt fragile under the onslaught of new threats. Armored alien battalions pouring through cosmic rifts, nightmarish creatures that bent every rule of biology. Super soldier serum or no, Steve Rogers felt shockingly ordinary. His mind flickered to the roster of heroes already in play. Bruce Banner, a man who became the Hulk when provoked. Tony Stark, whose Iron Man armor could solo a small army. The mysterious blonde god whose thunderbolts were whispered about in awed tones. And Damien Ambalaka himself, a living legend, returned. By comparison, Steve lacked the raw power to tackle these foes head-on. Sending him into the front line now would be like asking a praying mantis to stop an avalanche. He halted at the cockpit's observation window, New York's skyline shimmering below. Tapping his comm unit, he spoke with measured calm. Second update has been sent. Let's await the field reports. Outside, the night pulsed with techno-magic and extraterrestrial menace. For Steve Rogers, this was no longer just a fight for survival. It was a test of whether an old hero could still find his place in a world that had sprinted ahead. Chapter 172, Reluctant to Refuse. It's perfectly natural that you're unsettled after watching those reports, Agent Coulson said, fixing his gaze on Captain Steve Rogers. Blue Star has never faced anything like these aliens. That's why you must remember who you are. Steve's jaw clenched, the weight of Coulson's words pressing in on him. He'd glimpsed the invaders' power, far beyond anything from his own era. More than once, he'd toyed with the idea of simply returning to World War II, where the lines were clear and the enemy was human. Steve Rogers, Coulson continued, voice low but urgent. "You're not just another soldier. You're Blue Star's first true hero. The abilities you carry are outside the realm of ordinary human understanding." He paused. Steve's shoulders stiffened. "If you refuse to stand with us against these aliens," Coulson said, "then ordinary people will have no hope left. They'll be overwhelmed. We need you fighting by our side, not as their adversary, but as their ally." Yes, the new Avenger recruits have unmatched skill, but their personalities, well, they're complicated, and communication has been a real challenge. That's why S.H.I.E.L.D. needs you more than ever. Coulson's eyes shone with conviction. "Please, Steve, lend us your strength. Not just for S.H.I.E.L.D., but for everyone on Blue Star." Captain America's usual steel resolve wavered. He looked away, uncertainty flickering across his features. Coulson remained silent, waiting, but in that stillness, the fate of the planet hung in the balance. "I hope I can really pull this off." Damien took a slow breath, letting Agent Coulson's words sink in before he spoke. Coulson was right. Black Widow and Hawkeye were exceptional on Earthbound missions, but even their remarkable skills might not be enough against an alien force. This time, they faced an unknown enemy, one far beyond the human threats they'd dealt with before. They'd need greater power and sharper tactics than any they'd used on Blue Star. To be honest, Damien admitted to himself that he had doubts. Was he truly up to the task? Could he stand shoulder to shoulder with gods or monsters from another world? Yet when Coulson asked for his help, Damien knew he couldn't refuse. He'd never been one to walk away when his country or the planet needed him most. "You can do this," Coulson said firmly. "I have no doubt. Your combat instincts are unparalleled, and your strategic mind is sharp enough to lead us through whatever comes next." Relief and resolve flickered through Damien's chest. He had given everything to become America's first super soldier, forging himself into the nation's shield. Now, as the threat of an alien invasion loomed, those sacrifices felt heavier than ever. But with Coulson's trust backing him, Damien felt ready to prove that he truly could make a difference. Even if Damien didn't dare to dream of matching the raw power of Dr. Banner, Tony Stark, Thor, or the Demon Harvey, he still longed to play his part for the United States. Compared to those four, his abilities were little more than an ordinary man's. Yet in a world where such titans walked among them, beings capable of unleashing catastrophic destruction if they lost control, being an ordinary human might be his greatest asset. What they desperately needed was someone who could serve as a bridge between these superpowered individuals and the rest of the Avengers. As a fellow American hero, Damien Rogers could count on at least a measure of respect from Dr. Banner and Tony Stark. Even a sliver of goodwill was enough to open lines of communication. "I understand," Damien said, meeting Agent Coulson's steady gaze. He felt the weight of Coulson's confidence in him and had no choice but to reassure him in return. "By the way, we've made a few tweaks to your uniform," Coulson added with a wry smile. "I also tossed in some design suggestions of my own," Damien replied, brimming with conviction. Phil Coulson laughed at his earnest tone. "All right, let me show you what we've done. My uniform." Damien frowned as he looked at Coulson. "Isn't the stars and stripes pattern a little outdated?" Coulson met his gaze, his expression serious. "Maybe so, but sometimes people need a reminder of what we're fighting for." Damien thought back to his old costume, loud, unwieldy, hopelessly behind the times. He much preferred his current jacket and comfortable civilian clothes. "With everything going on and the battle about to begin, I'd rather keep my existing gear," he began, ready to refuse. "Look," Coulson said softly, "Tony Stark and the Hulk joining us has already taken the Avengers' strength up several notches. But these invaders have the power to control minds. If they got hold of Stark, he'd become a far greater threat than any alien army. I need Captain America, your dedication and your sense of justice, to hold this team together before things spiral out of control." Damien fell silent, absorbing the weight of Coulson's words. The coming fight would demand more than manpower. It would demand hope and symbol of the past to inspire everyone to stand firm. He knew what he had to do. Damien stood stiffly in the barracks bay, staring at the drab uniform laid out before him. He'd refused every other set, too antiquated, too ill-fitting, but when the order came down from high command, there was simply no arguing. Grumbling under his breath, he tugged the faded jacket over his shoulders and did his best to ignore the itchy fabric. Far below the surface, in a hidden subterranean research chamber, Loki knelt before the Mind Stone. Its pulsing energy connected him to the far reaches of the universe. Closing his eyes, he reached out with his thoughts. The Chitauri grow increasingly restless, he observed. From the shadows emerged a hulking figure draped in a tattered black cloak. Alien armor glinted beneath the folds, and a featureless mask covered his face. In his gauntleted hand, he bore a glowing scepter. "They require direction," the Chitauri general intoned. "Order them to hold their ranks." Loki's lips curved into a faint smile. "Very well. Or would you prefer to lead them yourself?" The general's voice swelled with pride. "I will command them to a glorious victory." Suppressing a flash of contempt, Loki raised an eyebrow. The destroyer had never returned to Blue Star, and he doubted any Chitauri assault would succeed. Still, he relished the prospect of chaos. "A battle, then?" The general bristled. "Is slaughtering the vermin on Blue Star anything less than war?" "A swift, glorious campaign," he added with disdain. Loki tilted his head, voice as smooth as silk. "All well and good, provided your forces truly are invincible." For the first time, uncertainty flickered behind the general's mask. He straightened, bristling at Loki's challenge. "How dare you question us?" Loki's chuckle echoed softly around the chamber. "Question me. Let us not forget who granted you that scepter in the first place." Loki's voice reverberated through the cavernous hall, cold and unyielding. "In your exile and disgrace, I offer you ancient knowledge and a new mission." The Chitauri general bristled. Once he had sat on Asgard's throne. Once he had been a king. Now he was nothing more than a refugee, betrayed, broken, and desperate. He rose to his full height, eyes blazing. "I was king of Asgard yourself," he snarled. "You dare remind me of my greatest shame?" Loki's lips curved into a faint, contemptuous smile. "Your grievances are petty," he replied smoothly. "Our ambitions extend far beyond the Blue Star. The Rubik's Cube, the relic you clutch, will open the door to an infinitely greater realm." A dark laugh escaped the general's throat. "Do not flatter yourself," he shot back. "The cube remains in my power." Loki's green eyes glowed brighter. "We shall see whose power endures," he said softly. "Your loyalty or your arrogance." Silence fell as the two adversaries measured one another across the chamber. Somewhere deep within the rocky walls, the mysterious cube pulsed with latent energy. In its glow lay the promise of conquest, and in the making of a new world order. Chapter 1d3, Each Other's Concerns. The moment Loki finished speaking, General Chitauri closed the gap between them in an instant. His clawed right hand shot forward, the sharp talons hovering inches from Loki's face. "Don't misunderstand," Loki said evenly, lifting a placating hand. "I never intended to threaten you." General Chitauri's low growl shook the air. "But until that portal opens..." Loki held up a finger, his voice icy. "Your soldiers don't answer to you. Your words are empty on paper." The general's eyes narrowed, impatience flickering in their depths. Loki continued without flinching. "Very well. Order your Asgardian forces to launch their assault. But mark my words, if they fail, and that Rubik's Cube ends up anywhere but in our hands, we will find whoever's responsible. No corner of the universe will hide you from us." A cruel smile curved Chitauri's mouth. He leaned close enough that Loki could feel the rasp of his breath. "Do you even know what true pain is?" he whispered. "Compared to him, all your suffering will be like honey on your tongue." With a sudden motion, the general slapped Loki across the face. The god blinked, shock rippling through him as his scattered consciousness snapped back to his body. Loki staggered, one hand rising to touch the burning sting on his cheek. If it weren't for Thanos, the looming presence whose name sent shivers through every corner of the cosmos, Loki doubted he would have dared return to the Blue Star and stir up more trouble. But here he was, face to face with a warning that would echo in his mind far longer than the pain. Loki knew that the only creature capable of destroying the destroyer still lay hidden on Blue Star. Yet after his conversation with Damien, he realized the young operative's loyalty wasn't absolute. The last assault had been orchestrated by Tony Stark, not Damien himself. Still, if Blue Star took too much damage, Damien might abandon his reservations and throw in with the invaders. So Loki decided to let him see the Chitauri army's true power for himself. As for any threat from General Chitauri, Loki dismissed it outright. He'd already mapped out his escape long before this operation began. His guiding principle was simple: always secure your retreat before the first arrow flies. Only by guaranteeing his own safety could he execute every other piece of his plan. If he fell in battle, all his schemes would crumble with him. Meanwhile, Steve Rogers touched down a fighter jet on the massive S-Shield carrier. The moment he climbed onto the deck, Agent Coulson barked, "Go get the captain's gear." Although Coulson wasn't the highest-ranking officer aboard, his orders still carried weight. "Yes, sir," the soldier at his side replied, already moving to obey. As Steve stepped off the plane, he was greeted by the sight of a striking red-haired woman walking toward him with confident, measured strides. Agent Coulson couldn't help but smile at her arrival. "Agent Romanoff, this is Captain Rogers." Though he'd read her file, Steve found himself momentarily taken aback by the way her tight trousers and crimson blouse accentuated every inch of her athletic grace. He managed a polite nod. "Good afternoon, ma'am." He'd met plenty of impressive women before, so he kept his reaction in check and returned her greeting with ease. Across the tarmac, Natasha's earpiece crackled. "Captain, someone on the carrier's bridge is looking for you. They've already activated facial recognition tracking." She added over her shoulder. Steve caught her arching a single eyebrow at him, sharp, appraising, but she seemed utterly unconcerned by his stare. With a quick flick of her fiery hair, she spoke into her mic. "All right, gentlemen, catch up once you've had a chance to talk." Coulson glanced between them, then nodded. "See you inside." As he stepped away, Natasha gave Steve a half-smile. "Natasha Romanoff, one of S-Shield's top field agents." "Pleased to meet you, Agent Romanoff," Steve said, extending a hand. She accepted it firmly, ice in her eyes and a high, nant of a challenge in her grin. "Let's get to work, Captain," she said. Together, they headed back toward the carrier, where the next phase of their mission was already underway. Once Agent Coulson excused himself, Natasha turned her gaze to Steve, a playful smile curling her lips. She extended her hand. "Captain America, Steve Rogers." Steve returned her gesture, giving her hand a firm yet gentle shake before releasing it with a courteous nod. "When we recovered you from the ice, it caused quite a stir." Natasha's smile widened. It made a lot of people happy. She gave a light laugh, falling into step beside him. "And I'm curious, were you one of the happy ones?" Steve's eyes gleamed as he met her gaze. "Absolutely." Natasha regarded him coolly, but allowed herself a polite nod. Having Captain America back in the field meant the Avengers now had a truly unwavering ally, something that would only make her own missions run more smoothly. At that moment, Steve's attention shifted as a middle-aged man with unruly curls approached. "Dr. Banner," he called out. Bruce Banner looked up at the familiar greeting and saw Steve Rogers approaching with a grin. He closed the distance between them, and they shook hands warmly. "I hear you've managed to track down the Rubik's Cube," Banner said. Steve nodded. "That's right, but there's more to it. Didn't you pick up any other details?" Banner's hands fluttered in a nervous gesture. "As long as you keep him from showing up, everything should be fine, right?" Steve's smile widened, tinged with something unreadable. "You must think this all sounds pretty strange, since you've, well, been away for decades." Banner shifted uncomfortably at the mention of the Hulk's absence. He glanced up and down the corridor, then forced a more casual tone. "Honestly, apart from a handful of oddball moments, most of this place feels unexpectedly familiar." Steve's expression flickered with disappointment, but he let it pass. Together, they fell into step and continued down the hallway, speaking in low tones. Finally, Steve paused at a set of double doors and called back, "Gentlemen, why don't you head inside? We can discuss the rest in there." Damien pressed his shoulder against the cool metal bulkhead. "It's going to get hard to breathe in here after a while," he muttered. Natasha, noticing Steve Rogers and Bruce Banner trading nervous glances, stepped forward. "Enough standing around. Let's keep moving." Footsteps clattered across the hangar deck, and deep mechanical roars shook the carrier's hull. Steve paused mid-stride. "What is this? Some kind of submarine?" A distant hiss of draining water answered him. Steve frowned. "They actually want us locked in a pressurized tank underwater?" Bruce rubbed his hands together, forcing a wry laugh to steady himself. "Hey, I've always wanted an exclusive tour of S.H.I.E.L.D.'s deep-sea facilities. They rounded the corner and came to the deck's edge. Below them, the ocean churned into a vast whirlpool, water spiraling downward as if sucked into another world. When the vortex finally cleared, a tremendous vessel slithered upward from the depths, its dark hull dwarfing the carrier itself. Steve and Bruce stood speechless, eyes wide. Even Natasha looked impressed. Damien could only stare, heart pounding as the massive sub fully materialized before them. With a thunderous roar from its propellers, the colossal vessel, more like a flying aircraft carrier, began to lift off. The turbulent winds slapped at Steve Rogers and Bruce Banner's hair, sending it whipping backward. "Oh man," Steve muttered, squinting up at the rising behemoth. "This is even crazier than I thought." Bruce, however, was focused on something far more serious. If he lost his temper on this airborne battleship and the Hulk broke free, the results would be catastrophic. He'd much rather stay on solid ground. At least then, if he slipped for a moment, civilians could scatter before the Hulk reached them. "Dr. Banner, we promise we won't do anything to upset you," Natasha reassured him, stepping closer. "Please, trust me, come with me," she added softly, offering him a steady hand. Bruce forced himself to inhale deeply, pushing down the tightening knot of fear in his chest. There was no use standing on the runway any longer. He squared his shoulders and followed Natasha aboard. Steve caught his eye, concern flashing across his face, but he said nothing. He could see that Bruce had steeled himself against the Hulk's pull, and for now, that was all they could hope for. The small device clasped on Damien's wrist emitted a soft hum. Its magnetic shielding would go a long way toward suppressing a Hulk transformation. With that precaution in place, he, Steve, and Natasha stepped into the control cabin of the airborne battleship. The moment he entered, Steve froze. Dozens of technicians manned consoles all around them, and beyond the panoramic window, a brilliant sky stretched out as if they were cruising high above the clouds. Steve had seen plenty of advanced military hardware before, but this was on another level entirely, top secret even by the most classified Department of Defense standards. If not for the alien invasion, the vessel would have posed as nothing more than an ordinary aircraft carrier floating at sea. "Let's disappear." Nick Fury's gravelly voice crackled over the comm. He swung up to the main console and with a few taps, issued his orders. "Reflectors on." Natasha glanced over, acknowledged the command, then relayed it down the line. In an instant, the massive warship blinked out of sight, its stealth field rendering it invisible to prying eyes. Fury climbed down from the console and offered Damien a warm smile. "Thanks for coming on such short notice, Dr. Damien." Damien inclines his head. "Of course, Director Fury. Let me know how I can help." Fury led the way deeper into the glowing heart of the ship, the distant roar of jet engines a reminder that even in this hidden stronghold, the fight for Earth's safety would never truly pause. "Thank you for your invitation," Damien said, offering Nick Fury a firm handshake. Then he released Fury's hand and added, "But I do have one question. How long do you intend to keep me here?" Fury's face remained entirely earnest. "I realize we weren't as diplomatic as we should have been. For that, I apologize. The truth is, we need your expertise, and frankly, the power you carry. Once we recover the cosmic cube, however, you'll be free to go." Damien met Fury's gaze without flinching. He knew the director wasn't just interested in his scientific mind. If circumstances demanded it, Fury would readily unleash the Hulk within him. Still, Damien held his temper. "All right," he said quietly. "What's your progress so far?" Fury nodded and gestured toward Agent Phil Coulson standing nearby. Coulson tapped a few commands into a compact tablet, swiping through live feeds. "We've hacked every wireless camera feed we can reach. Satellite uplinks, mobile phones, laptops," Coulson reported. "If there's a broadcast signal out there, we're watching it." Fury turned back to Damien. "Bottom line, we're covering the globe. We'll know the moment anyone lays eyes on the cube." Damien studied the two men before him. He still wasn't sure he trusted them, but for now, it was the only way to get his freedom and to keep that power in check. "We're searching blind here," Natasha said, folding her arms. "We need to narrow it down, or we'll be too late." Bruce Banner frowned at the bank of readouts. "How many spectrometers can you bring online?" Natasha tapped her datapad. I can code a clustering algorithm to isolate the anomaly. That should at least let us rule out several sectors. Banner nodded. Good, then find me a workspace, somewhere I can set up the spectrometers without interference. Nick Fury, who'd been watching the exchange, leaned forward. Banner looked away, uncomfortable. He hated being cooped up on the Quinjet any longer than necessary. Fury turned to Natasha. Agent Romanoff, escort Dr. Banner to his lab. Banner winced at the implication. He knew all too well that controlling the Hulk was almost impossible for ordinary agents, but Fury had a strategy. Only someone Banner cared about, someone he trusted, could pull him back from the brink of the Hulk's rage. Natasha Romanoff was that person. By working side by side, they just might forge the bond strong enough to keep him grounded, even when the Green Giant tried to take over. S.H.I.E.L.D. planned to make Dr. Bruce Banner's ability to turn into the Hulk their primary response team in the event of an alien attack. Even if they couldn't perfect the transformation immediately, Nick Fury assured Banner that with time, they would. And once they'd established the process, any future extraterrestrial threat would see Fury calling on him first. Natasha Romanoff led Banner through the dimly lit corridors toward the secure lab. She wondered why Fury had specifically assigned her to escort him. Surely any agent could have handled it. Offering him a brief nod, she said, "Everything's ready for you, Doctor. All the equipment, the monitoring stations, it's exactly as you requested." Banner returned her nod with equal brevity. Though this was their first meeting, he already distrusted the Black Widow. She'd engineered a clever trap to draw him out, and he didn't forget betrayals easily. Still, he couldn't deny her striking beauty. Banner reminded himself not to let that soften his wariness. Meanwhile, S.H.I.E.L.D. analysts worked furiously to pinpoint Loki's location. Suddenly, a bald technician sitting before a bank of screens straightened in his chair. "Sir," he announced, "facial recognition has turned up a possible lead. There's an individual whose features match with 79% certainty." Nick Fury crossed the room in 2 strides, eyes fixed on the monitor. This was the break they'd been waiting for. Chapter 7. The Autograph Assignment. I'd been a little embarrassed to admit to Steve that I collect trading cards, especially since I wanted him to autograph mine. It wasn't exactly standard procedure for an Avenger, but I'd held on to the hobby ever since I was a kid. When Coulson first heard my confession, he'd chuckled and promised to get an autograph from my favorite hero. I never imagined the whole thing would end up on Nick Fury's radar. Moments after the mission report hit HQ, Fury himself showed up, brow furrowed and eyes glued to the screen. "Location?" he barked. "Königstrasse 28, Stuttgart, Germany," I replied, watching as he tapped coordinates into the satellite feed. With a flick of his wrist, he zoomed in until the building's facade stood out sharp and clear. Steve watched silently and then looked over at me. "Nobody's hiding," he observed. Fury didn't bother disguising his next order. "Captain Rogers," he said, "you're up. Head out there and get that autograph, recon. Move." Steve's jaw tightened. Tony was still in transit, and Banner couldn't guarantee full control over the Hulk this close to the field. That left Steve as the only available Avenger who could handle an in-person mission without risking a gamma blow-up. With a curt nod, he saluted the screen and stepped toward the elevator. I sighed, a grin pulling at my lips. "Good luck, Captain, and thanks." He shot me a quick smile. "Bring back that signature, Damien." 5th update posted. Please cast your votes. Chapter 175. Can't break the defense. Damien slipped into Stuttgart under cover of dusk, making his way to 28 Königstrasse. Tonight, the Cypher Estate was hosting its grandest ball of the season, an opulent affair filled with diplomats, aristocrats, and society's elite. It was the perfect stage for the second phase of their operation. Earlier that evening, Loki had already secured Dr. Heinrich Cypher's prized cornea, the artifact they needed. Meanwhile, Hawkeye, perched on the mansion's parapet, had deftly triggered a hidden switch to unlock the inner sanctum. With the preliminary objectives complete, Damien watched from the shadows as Loki prepared to reveal himself. Loki emerged first, clad in gleaming gold armor and a flowing cloak the color of molten sunset. His horned helmet crowned his head like antlers silhouetted against the night sky, and he carried his staff, pulsing faintly with otherworldly energy. Unfazed by the carriage horses and chamberlain bowing before him, he strode toward the grand front doors. In a heartbeat, he halted, raised his scepter, and summoned more than 20 perfect duplicates of himself. Each one mirrored his sardonic grin, each one radiated menace. The assembled guests froze. Crystal chandeliers trembled overhead, laughter died on every lip. Then, in uncanny unison, the legion of Loki spoke, their voices booming through the marble courtyard. Kneel. A shudder passed through the crowd. Noblewomen and diplomats alike dropped to their knees, eyes wide with terror. Loki's true figure stepped forward, the echo of his decree still hanging in the air. He surveyed the humiliated multitude and let loose a single, mocking laugh. "Do you find this difficult?" he taunted. "Or is yielding to your conqueror simply in your nature?" A chorus of clone voices followed. "Isn't it obvious? This is who you are. Submission is the essence of humanity." Behind the spectacle, Damien observed the guests' trembling forms. Despite their fortified defenses, guards, gates, secrets, they had cracked in the face of pure intimidation. But this assault was only the prelude. The real barrier to breach lay deeper within the safer estate, the vault where their ultimate prize awaited. And Damien, standing in the shadows, knew that no army of illusions, no matter how fearsome, could permanently hold back what they had come to claim. The grand illusion of freedom steals life's greatest joys and drives you into a mad pursuit of power, Loki declared, his voice echoing through the hall. You were born to be ruled. In the end, you will always bow to those stronger than yourself. He strode into the assembly with deliberate grace, his golden breastplate gleaming under torchlight and the antlered helm atop his head lending him an almost divine presence. All around him, black and white alike, the crowd fell silent, too awed and frightened to speak. None could deny the raw authority radiating from this armored figure. To question him would have been to tempt certain death. Yet from the back of the room came a defiant murmur. A frail, silver-haired man, his features lined with the burdens of half a century, rose unsteadily to his feet. His eyes, bright with unyielding fire, met Loki's without a flicker of fear. "Very well," the old man said, his voice quivering yet resolute. "If I must surrender, it will never be to someone like you." Loki paused, amusement dancing in his eyes as he regarded the upstart challenger. "There has never been anyone like me," he replied, a smirk curling across his lips. "No, there will always be men like you, so arrogant you think a little power entitles you to everyone's loyalty." Though bent by age, the old man's words cut through the hall like a blade. He had lived long enough to witness countless politicians and generals cripple themselves with pride. Strength and authority aren't identical, but both breed the same dangerous conceit. Loki's lips curved into a cold smile. "I admire your fortitude, old man, but respect must be earned." He lifted his scepter, and in an instant a ending beam of light erupted from its tip. The old man's body was engulfed in flames, reduced to ashes before a single cry could escape his lips. A hushed terror fell over the assembled courtiers. Heads bowed. No one dared breathe a word. Each knew that any attempt at defiance would be met with the same ruthless fate. Loki surveyed the silent crowd, disappointment flickering in his eyes. "As expected," he murmured, "you were all born to be ruled." At that moment, someone charged in from the side, braced behind a gleaming shield, and slammed into Loki's torso with bone-jarring force. Where such an impact might have shattered a wall, against Loki's arm it only rang out in a metallic clang. Damien himself didn't so much as flinch, yet the attacker was hurled backward several paces by the sheer repulsion. Loki turned his mocking gaze on the newcomer. The man wore boldly striped tights, a white star emblazoned on his chest, a most ridiculous sight. "An American soldier," Loki sneered, "here to protect your friends?" Even in motion, Loki's eyes glittered with recognition. "Last time I visited Germany," he continued, "I met someone who fancied himself superior." Steve Rogers rose slowly to his feet, planting that same star-spangled shield firmly before him. His heart pounded, but he squared his shoulders. His eyes still held a flicker of fear, yet he forced a steady calm, determined to inspire confidence in everyone around him. Above them, the thunder of jet engines split the sky. A sleek fighter rolled into position, its underbelly bristling with weaponry. From loudspeakers mounted on the jet, a commanding voice crackled out, "Loki, this is your final warning. Lay down your weapon and surrender immediately." Silence fell for a heartbeat, as Loki weighed his next move against the reinforced American forces arrayed before him. Loki sneered, raised his scepter, and unleashed a volley of 10 searing beams at the fighter jet. Though Natasha twisted the plane just in time, the blasts punched through its flank. Her craft wasn't Thor's hammer, but a fighter's precision and firepower, now badly compromised. Even where the armor held, the jet's balance was shattered. Luckily, they weren't flying at extreme altitude, and Natasha's expert piloting kept her from plummeting to her doom. On the ground, Steve Rogers pressed his back against a crumbling wall, shield in hand. He hurled the vibranium disc at Loki's helmeted head, an attack that could rip through steel like paper. The impact tilted Loki's head, but didn't break his defenses. Undeterred, the shield arced back to Steve's arm, as if it never left his grip. Steve's heart pounded. He was the only one who could stop this. Launching himself forward, he rammed the shield's rim squarely into Loki's jaw. The thunderous clang echoed across the battlefield, but Loki merely flicked his eyes downward, amusement dancing in his gaze. To the god of mischief, an American soldier's blows were nothing more than a nuisance. Loki didn't even flinch as he raised the scepter and launched a crackling bolt of magic at Steve. The spell struck Steve's shield and ricocheted straight back, slamming into Loki with full force. The god staggered, stumbling backward, and that was all the opening Steve needed. With a fierce roar, Steve lunged forward and unloaded a crushing punch. Though his baseline strength tops 5 tons, when he goes all out his blows can exceed 10, enough to tear down a wall. That fist rocked toward Loki's face at impossible speed, but it felt as if it struck forged steel. Loki grinned despite the stumble. The hit had only stung, not truly hurt him. Mocking the American's audacity, Loki swept Steve aside with a backhand kick to the chest. Steve slammed his shield against the blow and managed to absorb most of the impact, but the remainder blasted him backward like a speeding freight truck. He rolled across the pavement to break his fall, coming up on one knee as tremors shook his arms. Steve shook out the sting in his limbs and glared across the debris-strewn courtyard at Loki. Determination burning in his eyes. He'd underestimated the trickster god. This time, he wouldn't make the same mistake. Damien had always known that ordinary people stood no chance against an alien threat. Yet when he faced this particular adversary, an enemy who wielded its powers like a long-range mage, he'd convinced himself that sheer physical might would carry the day. He charged forward with his vibranium shield raised, expecting to shatter the alien's defenses in a single blow. Instead, each strike rang hollow against an impenetrable barrier. The creature barely even flinched. 16 days into the new year, Damien's console chimed with the first official mission update, a stark reminder that he was only just beginning to learn how truly formidable his foe could be. Chapter 176, Surrender Now? You know nothing of true power, yet you dare challenge those stronger than yourself. Tell me, who's the real fool? Loki's voice dripped with contempt as he regarded the American soldier who had staggered to his feet again, hands trembling. A cold smile curled at the corners of the trickster god's lips. I. Steve Rogers opened his mouth, but no words came. Before he could speak, Loki raised his hand, and the air around them shimmered. From the haze emerged dozens of identical Lokes, phantom doubles that flickered like mirages. Against Thor, these illusions offered little resistance. But against Steve, an exceptionally well-trained soldier, yet still a mere mortal, the clones were devastatingly effective. 20, 30, 40 of them closed in on Steve at once. Their attacks were coordinated, relentless. He slashed and punched, scattering one batch of phantoms, but even as each fell apart, new ones formed in their place. Every strike seemed only to fuel their numbers. Steve's breath came in ragged gasps. He staggered under the assault, his shield battered and cracked. He wanted to rise to America's defense, to protect each and every life that counted on him, but this foe was beyond anything he'd ever faced. Loki possessed a sorcerous might that defied common sense, a fantasy-level power Steve simply could not match. Step by agonizing step, the soldier was driven back. His strength ebbed, his spirit wavered, and through it all, Loki maintained that cold, triumphant smile, as if savoring every moment of his opponent's despair. Stop resisting, Loki taunted softly. Surrender. Only then can you save what little dignity you have left. While Loki toyed with the American soldier, a laser beam tore through the sky and struck him squarely. Though Loki shrugged off the blast, the force spun him airborne. Simultaneously, bursts of light exploded overhead like fireworks, severing the phantoms he'd unleashed and saving Steve from certain peril. A fiery trail arced through the air before the beam's final flare crashed to Earth in a roaring plume. Touching down amid the smoke and rubble, Iron Man knelt briefly, then rose in full heroic splendor. "Looks like the old man's a lost cause," he said, voice crackling. "Might as well let him scream a little longer. It won't do any more harm. And as long as no one else steps up, Loki probably won't make another move. Too bad you dove in first and put yourself on his radar." He glanced at Steve. "He's strong, and he's got magic. Stay sharp." Steve, still catching his breath, could only nod. The fight had taken its toll on him, but he relayed what little intelligence he'd picked up about Loki's tactics. Tony listened, noting Steve's fatigue, and kept his gaze trained warily on the darkening sky. "Come on, Bambi." Tony Stark broke off his attack on Captain America and zeroed in on Loki, who was rising to his feet. With his upgraded armor humming with power, Tony felt invincible. Short of the Destroyer, he was certain he could fell any opponent with a few brutal blows. This alien, who just bested Steve Rogers so easily, didn't faze him in the least. In Tony's eyes, Steve was just another man. Loki bristled at the mocking nickname, but he'd already witnessed Stark's full might. He knew better than to push his luck. With a simple gesture, the illusions hiding his Asgardian armor melted away, and he stood revealed in his true form. Then, chest-heaving, he raised both hands in surrender. Defeating Tony Stark in a fair fight was out of the question. But if Loki could worm his way into the Avengers and ultimately claim the Mind Stone to control Stark himself, Asgard would hold the decisive advantage. "You're surrendering now?" Tony asked, eyebrows raised in genuine surprise. Loki allowed himself a small, amused smile. "It seems you know me, Tony Stark." Neither man moved. Stark expected resistance. Loki expected hesitation. But in that charged silence, each recognized the other's power, and the game had only just begun. Natasha leaned back in her chair, her half-dark hair brushing her shoulders as she studied Tony Stark with a half-smile. "So, when you say you only hesitated at the time because you didn't want to see blood, does that mean if you saw me now, you wouldn't plead my case?" Tony's grin softened into a wry smirk. "Back then, I just discovered that Damien had, let's call them, superhuman abilities. He hadn't yet come into contact with the Void, and I knew Pepper would have had a full-on panic attack if she'd found a body lying in the mansion. That's why I begged you to step in." Natasha raised an eyebrow. "I understand. And yes, I'm aware I'm, unquestionably, attractive, Mr. Stark. But pretty faces aren't bulletproof. If you truly care about your safety, humility and caution will serve you far better than charm." Tony folded his arms, nodding slowly. "All right. For the sake of protecting Blue Star, I'm willing to work with you, but don't expect me to babysit a pack of weak, arrogant amateurs." Natasha nodded in return. "Noted. Thank you for the reminder, Mr. Stark. I'll be sure to pass along your advice." As she stood, Natasha realized that no amount of beauty would sway Tony's opinion. If anything, her attempt at levity had only stirred a flicker of irritation in his eyes. With a quiet shiver, she tucked her hands behind her back and reminded herself, better to stay sharp than rely on glamour alone. Tony realized Natasha wasn't trying to flirt, she was simply sizing him up, so he shrugged it off. "Have you two worked together before?" he asked, nodding toward her and Hawkeye. Natasha raised an eyebrow. "Why didn't Fury tell me about this?" "Wait, this is our first joint op, right?" Steve interjected, having overheard them. The mission brief only mentioned that Black Widow and Hawkeye had a history. For him, teaming up with Tony Stark and Bruce Banner was entirely new. Tony smirked. "You've been out of action so long, you're forgetting how things work." Steve bristled. "Look, my strength might not be off the charts, but it's enough to clear out terrorists on Blue Star and run S.H.I.E.L.D.'s errands." Tony laughed. "When far bigger threats show up, there's a whole roster of heavy hitters on Blue Star, me included, who'll handle them." Steve frowned at the emphasis. "Heavy hitters?" Tony met his gaze coolly. "You think I'm the only one with that kind of firepower?" Steve crossed his arms. "Did you miss the video reel about me?" Tony leaned in, amusement in his eyes. "Do I really need to spell it out?" When Steve heard that, he immediately thought back to the video, the one with the striking blonde man alongside Damien. Their display of power had truly outmatched Tony's, and yet Tony had the guts to admit outright that he was the weakest of the three. Steve simply had no retort. Moments later, the second update was dispatched. Chapter 177. He is adopted. What is your name? Where are you from? And what do you want? Tony Stark cut off Steve's protest. He turned to the silent figure before him, Loki. When the Asgardian refused to answer, Tony's right hand crackled with violet void energy. In one swift motion, he smashed his fist into Loki's abdomen with a thunderous bang. Loki's body slammed against the cabin wall. He doubled over, retching a mouthful of bitter liquid. Steve Rogers and Natasha Romanoff exchanged worried glances, stunned into silence by the ferocity of Tony's attack. "Don't think your silence makes you untouchable," Tony growled. "If I find out you've come here to harm Damien, our blue star, then you'll get your first glimpse of real hell." Without warning, Tony seized Loki by the hair, yanking his head back. His tone was icy. "Now," he demanded, "tell me your name." Loki, clutching his injured midsection, spat through clenched teeth. "I am Loki." Tony's eyes narrowed. "Loki, Asgardian, brother to Thor?" Recognition flickered across Tony's face. He released Loki with a thoughtful grunt, stepping back to reassess this unexpected captive. "No." Loki's head snapped back as Tony's hand tightened in his hair. "No?" Tony echoed, his voice cold. "There's no point in stalling." He yanked Loki forward and slammed him against the alloy bulkhead. With a sickening crunch, metal bowed beneath Loki's weight, and pain exploded behind his eyes. "Okay, fine, yes, I'm an Asgardian," Loki gasped, clutching at the dented wall for support. "Thor's brother?" "Yes, that Thor." Tony studied him, still holding him fast. "You call yourself Loki, son of Odin. You're not exactly blood to Thor, but you're his brother in name." Loki swallowed, tasting copper on his tongue. If Tony hadn't held back, he'd have broken every one of Loki's bones. He'd never have made it onto the Avengers aerospace battleship, let alone carried out whatever scheme he had in mind. Noting Loki's unearthly resilience, Tony released him, but kept his gaze locked on the trickster. "So you were the one who sent the destroyer after Blue Star," he said, voice flat. "What's your endgame, Loki? Speak, before I decide whether you'll walk away or spend the rest of your immortal life in a cell." "Wait, so you're telling me he planned to kill him, yet he'd still spare your life?" Tony Stark folded his arms, eyes narrowed on Loki. "Or did Saul owe you some gigantic favor he hasn't paid back?" Tony had been betrayed before, twice. He wasn't about to cut any slack for a prince of lies. When Thor had left to settle family affairs, Stark was certain Loki wouldn't survive. Yet here he was. Loki's pale green eyes darted between Tony and the others. He opened his mouth, but before he could speak, jagged forks of lightning split the sky. Thunder rolled so loud it rattled everyone's teeth. Loki stiffened. "Afraid of a little thunder?" he quipped, though his voice wavered. Steve Rogers exchanged a glance with Natasha. "I just don't trust anyone who summons storms for fun," he said quietly. Loki's smirk deepened. He knew what was coming. Almost on cue, a figure burst from the roiling clouds. In a single blinding flash, Thor descended, Mjolnir gripped tightly in his hand, lightning arcing down around him. He landed on the battleground with earth-shaking force. Wham! Thor planted his feet and raised his hammer, thunder roaring in his wake. His eyes, icy with wrath, locked onto Loki. "Brother," Thor's voice boomed, "what have you done now?" Jarvis's calm voice crackled over the comm. "Seeker inbound." Tony pressed a button on the console and the hatch above them whooshed open. In a single fluid motion, Thor vaulted down from the hovercraft and landed in the cabin. Steve rubbed his eyes in disbelief. "Thor?" He recognized the broad-shouldered blonde hero from the reconnaissance footage. Thor offered a sheepish bow. "Tony, I owe you an apology. My brother." Tony cut him off with a dismissive wave. "Forget it. His power's like a squawking chick next to the destroyer." Steve frowned. "Wait, how did you manage that?" Thor's expression darkened. "He actually sent the destroyer to finish you, yet you spared him." Tony leaned back, arms folded. "Even if he's gone off the deep end, he's still my brother." He glanced over at Loki, who was standing nearby, hands casually tucked into his tunic. Loki's lips curved into a subtle, grateful smile, and a flicker of warmth passed through his eyes. Natasha stepped forward, arms crossed tight. "He's slaughtered 70, maybe 80 innocents in the last 2 days, and you're worried about family ties? Tony shrugged, meeting her glare evenly. Some bonds run deeper than blood. Chapter 8. Shadows over Blue Star. He's adopted. The words hit Thor like a lightning bolt. His eyes flicked to Loki in disbelief before he forced a dismissive shrug. On the brink of claiming the Asgardian throne and protectorate over the 9 realms, Thor couldn't afford his brother's latest folly. If he publicly defended Loki now, Earth's champions, specifically Tony Stark, would have every reason to accuse him of collusion. Stark himself was a nuisance at worst, but his patron, Damien, was a far more dangerous game-changer, whispered to wield resources on par with Odin himself. A war between Asgard and Earth might leave them bruised but standing. Blue Star, one of the 9 realms, would be utterly devastated. Loki's usual smirk fell away, replaced by genuine disappointment. "Your brother plots your murder," he said softly, "and yet you still cling to our brotherhood?" Thor's jaw hardened. "So what? I could have ended you ages ago, saved us both this mess." Saul, standing nearby, ran a hand through his hair. "I still don't understand their ultimate aim. What scheme do they have to destroy Blue Star?" Tony Stark, catching the tension, narrowed his eyes. "Saul, what on earth are you two rambling about?" His voice rose. "Someone, explain, now." Chapter 7. The Brothers' Verdict. "Loki and I have shared a bond for more than 1,500 years, Damien began, voice steady. He stood before his 2 brothers, Thor, the mighty thunderer, and Loki, the ever-cunning trickster. Yes, Loki can be reckless, even ruthless at times, but he is still my brother. I cannot bring myself to kill him." Thor's brow furrowed. Damien met his gaze without flinching. "The only course of action," he continued, "is to imprison him. I've come to take Loki back to Asgard and keep him locked away forever." A hard glint flickered in Thor's eyes as he glanced at Loki, who was leaning casually against a marble column. "Father entrusted me with watching over Loki whenever he travels the 9 realms," Thor reminded Damien, voice laced with resentment. "But if he so much as dares to set foot on Blue Star again, if he even thinks about unleashing chaos there, I won't settle for a cell. I'll see to it that he's banished from existence." Loki straightened, his trademark smirk curving into a challenge. "Is that a promise, brother?" He folded his arms. "Because next time you catch me plotting a little mischief on Earth, Thor, don't blame me if your lightning falls on someone innocent. Friends, family, those lines get very blurry." Damien watched them both, heart weighed down by centuries of shared history. Listening to Loki's taunt, he suddenly understood why Thor had so often distanced himself from the trickster prince. And yet, after every triumph, every betrayal, every tearful reconciliation, they had always been brothers first. He exhaled slowly and held out his hand in concession. "Very well," he said. "I will not take him this time. But mark my words, Loki, one more stunt on Blue Star, and I won't merely imprison you. I'll ensure you can't hurt anyone, ever again." Loki's grin broadened, a reckless spark in his green eyes. Thor relaxed his shoulders. Damien turned away toward the portal that would return him to Earth, relieved yet apprehensive. 1,500 years of brotherly love still whispered hope of redemption, but one false move, and even that hope might be lost forever. Chapter 178. Blessing and Extremeness. Damien drifted into the void surrounding the fighter jet, his form blending seamlessly with the emptiness. From this hidden vantage point, he watched the scene below unfold with a mixture of wry amusement and incredulity. It was a tableau he'd seen, or nearly seen, in another life. Loki, ever the reluctant warrior, poised beside his brother Thor, ready to die for him if need be. Loki might never admit it, but Damien knew those hidden depths of loyalty and love ran true. Thor stood before Tony Stark on the tarmac, the steady hum of the jet's engines filling the air. Tony studied him coolly, the violet aura of his power crackling around his gauntlets. "Next time," Tony said, voice low but firm, "don't hold back." Thor inclined his head in earnest agreement. He knew, as well as Loki did, that facing Tony at full strength was a deadly gamble. That purple energy, so eerily potent, had no recorded source in any cosmic annal or engineering manual. Thor suspected it drew directly from Damien's own void-based power, funneled and magnified by Stark's unmatched technology. No mere god could easily withstand such a potent fusion of magic and machine. Loki's sharp gaze flicked between his brother and Tony. A silent vow passed through him. If he failed this mission, he would never again darken the skies of Blue Star. He straightened, resolve burning bright in his eyes. Failure was not an option. High above, Damien's unseen presence stirred with anticipation. The next clash, whenever it came, would test them all to the extreme. But for now, he remained a silent guardian in the void, ready to tip the scales at exactly the right moment. Even if Loki wants to cause trouble, he'll have to look beyond Asgard, Thor declared. So it's settled. Tony Stark leaned forward, curiosity piqued by Thor's unusual concession. You haven't been to Earth in ages, he observed. What's been holding you up? Thor sighed. The Bifrost is broken. Without it, Asgard can't make its regular trips to the Nine Realms. And to fix it, Thor continued, we need the Cosmic Cube. Its power once fueled the Rainbow Bridge. Without the cube, the Bifrost remains inoperable. At this, Saul raised an intrigued brow. The Bifrost ran on the Cosmic Cube? Tony nodded. According to my father, the cube was originally stored in Odin's vault. Centuries ago, he left it on Earth, Norway specifically. Since then, the Rainbow Bridge has held together on its own, and the cube has never wandered outside the Nine Realms. That's why Dad never bothered retrieving it. Thor gave a wry smile, Mjolnir humming faintly at his side. So here we are to reclaim what was left behind and bring the Bifrost back to life. Tony's surprise at finding the Cosmic Cube on Blue Star quickly turned to understanding once he learned it was one of God King Odin's treasures. That explained both its presence and its formidable space-jumping technology. When the time comes, Tony said, could I borrow it for my research? I've heard our space fighters will use wormhole jumps, but having a stable, reliable transmission point would be even better. I still owe you one. Thor regarded him thoughtfully. It's not out of the question, so long as you promise not to abuse its power. Natasha watched the Avengers circle the cube as if it already belonged to them. She had questions of her own, but faced with the combined might of Tony and Thor, found herself unable to speak. Steve finally grasped the truth. The strange artifact he'd stumbled across years ago, the so-called Cosmic Cube, was of alien origin, and its true master was Thor, the god of thunder. It made perfect sense to return it. Leaving the cube on Earth would only invite more calamity. After all, it had been Hydra's possession of the cube that unleashed their reign of terror in the first place. Handing it back to Thor would remove the threat from humanity's doorstep and place the artifact where it could be safely guarded. Natasha bit her lip but said nothing. Under normal circumstances, of course, you should earn a powerful relic to its rightful owner. Steve was even sympathetic to the idea. There was just one problem. Loki. I still have the Cosmic Cube in my hand, Loki announced, his eyes glinting as he addressed Thor and Tony, who were deep in discussion. If you value your life, I suggest you stay silent. Loki's smile was venomous. Your brother Thor won't strike you down. He can't bring himself to kill family, and I promised him I wouldn't end you today. I'll send you home unharmed. His tone shifted, colder still. But if you force my hand, if you compel me to act, Thor will try to stop me. Then we'll fight, and you might just have a chance to run. He stepped closer, eyes glittering. Go ahead. Let's see whether you can outrun me, or whether I catch you first. Damien, who'd been beside Thor only a moment before, snapped out of his reverie. He wheeled to face Loki, his steel-clad fist clenching at his side. He didn't need vibranium armor to put an end to this. The suit he wore now could do the job. He spoke in a low, controlled voice. Loki, enough of your games. Stand down. This ends today, and then I'll make sure you return where you belong. Thor watched his friend's hard gaze, then turned to Loki, voice trembling with restrained anger. You said it yourself. You adopted me. Is this how you repay family? Loki let out a derisive laugh, eyes flicking contemptuously between them. Family? He sneered. Don't mistake my blood for sentimentality, brother. Thor's eyes blazed with anger as he faced Loki. Even if you're adopted, Mother has cared for you for 1,500 years. Don't forget she taught you your magic. She's never treated you unfairly. He took a step closer, voice low but fierce. They say the kindness of nurturing outweighs the kindness of giving. We both know that's true, so I'm taking back every disrespectful word you just spat about her. If you're so callous that you can ignore 15 centuries of her love and sacrifice, then even if Father orders me to protect you across the Nine Realms, I refuse. From now on, Your life is your own responsibility. When Loki stayed stubbornly silent, Thor's frustration boiled over. He lunged forward, grabbing Loki by the collar and hauling him into his face. I've bent over backward to save you, tried to calm Tony's murderous wrath. Yet you keep stirring chaos. I haven't dealt with Tony Stark much, but I know he's no fool. For the safety of Midgard, Blue Star as they call it, he'd sooner see you dead than risk another catastrophe. Less than a year ago, your schemes with Rocky nearly tore that world apart. Damien watched from the shadows as Thor's temper flared, his brother's whole frame crackling with barely contained thunder. Loki swallowed hard and held up a hand. I take back everything I just said, he admitted, his voice tight. But the moment the words left his mouth, he saw the cold glint of murderous intent in Thor's eyes and knew better than to argue. Turning to Tony Stark, Loki forced a polite bow. Hand over the cosmic cube. Tony didn't flinch. He studied Loki for a long moment, then shook his head. It's not with me. Loki's shoulders sagged, but he recovered quickly. Of course I know you don't have it, he said, offering a thin, crooked smile. What I want is for you to lead us right to it. At that, Tony tapped his arc reactor belt. A soft chime sounded. Coordinates locked. The fourth update's been sent to command, he said, brushing imaginary dust off his jacket. All right, lads, let's go find our toy. Behind them, Damien stepped into the light, ready for whatever came next. Chapter 179. There's still a way. Tony, now's not the time, Thor said quietly. Tony Stark looked up, surprised by Thor's uncharacteristic restraint. Why not? Loki's already raised a Chitauri army. Surely you've heard. The Chitauri aren't just any mercenaries, Saul interjected, stepping forward. They're a savage, otherworldly host that conquers and consumes entire planets. Their allegiance to Loki makes them even more dangerous. Tony tapped his chin, eyes narrowing. Right. And with an army like that, Loki's bound to demand something in return, probably the cosmic cube. Exactly, Saul agreed. He plans to barter the cube's power to cement his control. Once he has it, he'll unleash the Chitauri on Blue Star, Earth, without hesitation. On hearing that, Steve Rogers' jaw clenched. The mere thought of another full-scale invasion sent a chill through him. Tony, grim-faced, leaned back in his chair. So if we thwart Loki's deal, Tony mused, he can't unleash his army, and Blue Star is safe. A determined smile tugged at Thor's lips. Then our course is clear. Tony Stark, Thor Odinson, will intercept Loki before he can strike his bargain. He'll learn that the Avengers never back down from a fight. Steve and Saul exchanged a look of relief and resolve. Despite the looming threat, they had a plan, and as long as they stood together, there was still hope. You two may be powerful, Loki said with a mocking tilt to his voice, but this is far more complicated than you realize. Win or lose, the Chitauri army will march on Blue Star. It's only a matter of time. His laughter rang through the chamber, cold and amused. Natasha and Steve exchanged worried glances. They knew how little Damien cared for Blue Star, and they'd heard whispered rumors of Thanos' grand design, to conquer that world and wipe out its inhabitants. As long as Thanos refrained from openly clashing with Damien, the Mad Titan's plan was bound to succeed. Loki didn't need Thanos to spell out every detail. He could feel the sweeping scale of that ambition. Nor was he here simply because Thanos had shared forbidden cosmic secrets. He was here for the challenge. He wanted to witness firsthand who would prevail in this clash of titans. Thanos, feared across the cosmos, or Damien, the mysterious young man whose barely contained power made even the bravest heroes uneasy. With that final taunting laugh, Loki sealed his intention to join the fray. And in that moment, Natasha and Steve felt a cold dread settle in their hearts. Are we truly prepared if another civilization in the cosmos decides to wage war on Earth? Maybe a handful of people, Tony Stark or Bruce Banner and his Hulk form, would have a fighting chance. But the vast majority of humanity, even our most elite armies, would almost certainly be outmatched by forces armed with far more advanced technology. I hate to admit it, but the Chitauri are fanatics. Once they fix on a target, they won't stop until it's completely destroyed. Thor exhaled heavily at Loki's grim words. Is there really no way to prevent this conflict? Captain America, still haunted by the devastation wrought when humans turned on each other, pressed his lips into a thin line. He'd seen what war could do to innocent lives, and the possibility of an intergalactic invasion only deepened his resolve to find another path. Chapter 8. Odin's Dilemma. Damien studied the swirling holo display before him, his jaw tightening. At our current technological level, if humanity faces an alien armada in open war, we'd stand no chance. Saul stood at Damien's side, arms folded. It's more than unlikely. It's virtually impossible. It's not completely hopeless, tough Loki said, stepping from the shadows. His dark cloak caught the faint glow of the projector. If my father, Odin, the god king of Asgard, intervened directly, he could bring their entire campaign to a halt. Damien frowned. Loki, you don't command the Chitauri fleet. If they've set their sights on Earth, it's by their own design. How do you propose to convince them otherwise? The trick, Loki replied, is understanding what they truly seek. Once I discern their goal, I can guide or misguide them. But to have any leverage, I must enlist Father's authority. Saul and Damien exchanged a glance. Then Saul nodded. Arrange it. Contact Odin. Before Loki could respond, Captain Steve Rogers entered the chamber. He paused at the doorway, taking in the tension. He'd long suspected the handsome stranger was no ordinary diplomat. Now it was clear. Loki really was of Asgardian blood. I would ask Father for help, Loki said quietly, but his strength has grown unstable. He's teetering on the edge of the dreamless sleep of Odin. If he falls into it, even for a moment, he cannot leave Asgard. Silence fell. No one knew how long Odin could delay his slumber, or whether he would awaken in time to save an entire planet. Damien rubbed his temples. Then we have to buy him time. We'll need every resource Earth can muster. Stark tech, Wakandan defenses, S-healed intel, everything. Steve stepped forward, and I'll assemble the Avengers. We'll hold the line until Odin awakens. Saul clasped his hands behind his back. It's settled. We buy time by any means necessary. Loki's eyes flashed with a mixture of hope and uncertainty. Very well. Let us pray my father's rest is delayed long enough to turn the tide. As the four of them prepared to mobilize Earth's defenses, and Loki readied to voyage to Asgard in search of Odin's audience, Damien felt the weight of every life on this planet pressing down on him. The war looming beyond the stars might be unimaginable, but for the first time in weeks, he believed they might just stand a chance. Steve Rogers frowned. If Odin could have handled this himself, he wouldn't have needed to teleport us here. There has to be another way. Tony Stark tapped his finger on the holoscreen. Odin's tied up. Something's blocking him back on Asgard. Plan A is off the table. Our only chance is to bring in Damien Ambalaka. Rumor has it his power comes close to Odin's. On Blue Star, he's essentially a sovereign-level force. His name and reputation echo across the cosmos. Even the Chitauri, bloodthirsty as they are, would think twice if they knew this planet was under his watch. Thor's expression grew grave. I strongly advise against it. Don't lure the Chitauri to Damien's estate as bait. We might win that battle, but if he ever learns we used his home as a trap, the retaliation would leave Blue Star in ruins. Tony glanced at Saul, the council's unseen strategist. All right, he said. What do you propose? Damien was a legend throughout the galaxy, known far and wide by his true title, Kassadin, the god of the void. Even the mighty Xandar Novacor, one of the universe's great powers, dared not challenge him. They tacitly allowed Kassadin's presence on Void Island, never sending a single trooper to confront him. By comparison, the Chitauri army, though fierce, was no match for Xandar's elite forces, let alone for Kassadin himself. The Novacor always tread carefully around Damien, acutely aware that a single misstep might earn their empire his wrath. Blue Star, however, lacked that leverage. To Damien, it was merely a convenient waypoint, a temporary haven in his endless travels. If Blue Star fell, he would simply move on, selecting another world to call home for as long as he pleased. There was no guarantee he would lift a hand to defend it. Humanity's only recourse was hope. Hope that Damien might, on his own initiative, intervene before the Chitauri, or something even more terrifying, wiped us from existence. Without his protection, we would be defenseless against an enemy whose power rivaled his own. And if he chose not to act, our fate would rest solely in the hands of a god who viewed our world as, at best, a fleeting curiosity. I wouldn't recommend crossing him, Tony warned, leaning forward. He's a complete devil, unbound by laws or morals, with the power to do literally whatever he wants. Natasha held up her hands. Okay, so if those two plans fail, what then? Steve ran a hand through his hair, frustration etched on his face. After listening to Tony's dire assessment and Natasha's pressing question, he finally sighed. There is another option, he admitted, but it comes with a price. Tony straightened and gave them a crooked smile. By the way, this is Update 5. Don't forget to vote. Chapter 180, Change of Plan. In the High Command briefing room, Damien studied the holographic projection of the Chitauri Armada looming at the edge of Blue Star's defenses. If we let them slip away without learning their lesson, he said, voice low but firm, they'll regroup, and next time they'll hit us when we're least prepared. Steve folded his arms, eyes narrowing. What do you suggest? Damien turned to face him. We use Loki as bait. Let him draw the Chitauri out of hiding. Once they swarm to engage him, our fleet moves in, surrounds them in open space, and we strike with everything we've got. Yes, it'll cost lives, but it's far less than the toll we'll pay if we sit back and wait for their next ambush. Tony Stark leaned forward, steepling his fingers. I've sacrificed years, my entire career, helping Blue Star reach for the stars. Since the Void Protocol, my power and perspective have grown, but I'm no god. I can't guarantee everyone's safety. If we want to end this war, sometimes we have to pick the lesser evil. A heavy silence fell over the room as they weighed the costs. Then Damien nodded. So it's settled. We'll turn their predators' advantage into their downfall, and hope the price we pay now spares us an even greater slaughter later. In a war between civilizations, there is no absolute right or wrong, only opposing interests. The Chitauri have their own objectives, and if Blue Star wants to avoid total devastation, it must act now. Unfortunately, Blue Star's technology remains limited. While clandestine weapons like the mushroom spores exist, the planet still lacks the capability to relocate its people once its environment is restored. That means the spores can only be deployed as a last resort, never lightly. Damien understood this all too well. If he hoped to repel the Chitauri invasion, he would have to use every resource at his disposal. Had they not already inflicted a crushing defeat, sending a clear message that Blue Star cannot be provoked, this war would have raged on until one civilization was erased from the map. Loki! Thor roared, slamming a hand on his fallen brother's shoulder. He understood exactly what Tony meant. Time was running out. Tony's gaze flicked between Thor and Loki, already calculating their next move. Long before Blue Star had grown into a burgeoning cosmic society, it had faced its first great test, an invasion by a far more advanced race from beyond the stars. Now, history threatened to repeat itself unless they struck back with all the cunning and courage they could muster. Damien watched Loki coolly. At this critical juncture, if Loki refused to cooperate, Damien would simply find another way to force his hand. There was no time for gentle persuasion. You're asking me to act as a double agent, Loki said, his voice low with suspicion. Perhaps, Damien admitted. But here's my offer. If I bring you back alive and this crisis is averted, you will not be locked away. Loki's pale eyes flickered. He opened his mouth to refuse, but then he caught Tony Stark's unwavering gaze. Stark's expression brooked no argument. Loki hesitated, then bowed his head. Very well. If you solve this crisis, I expect you to keep your word. I will not be confined, but on one condition. I will cause no mischief in the Nine Realms. Damien nodded. Agreed. No mischief in the Nine Realms. Thor, who had been standing a short distance away, stepped forward and offered Loki a brotherly smile. Our family has long protected the Nine Realms, he said. As princes of Asgard, you and I should stand united in that duty. This time, let us protect them together. Loki allowed himself a brief wry smile. The pact was sealed. Thor's boast about his royal title made Loki's chest tighten. Prince of Asgard, are you? Loki forced a trembling laugh. That's wonderful, Thor. Grinning, Thor swept Loki into a crushing bear hug. The younger god's lungs burned until he jabbed Thor in the ribs, forcing him to relent. If Thor didn't let go, Loki would choke, rotting in his brother's arms rather than at the hands of some Nine Realms enemy. He gasped, Thor, just this once, trust my word. Tony Stark's voice cut through the tension like a blade. Loki, if you refuse to help us, or worse, side with our enemies, know this. Even if Thor shields you and we tear through the galaxy trying to stop you, I will find you, and I will kill you. He fixed Loki with a steely glare. Then his tone softened, almost unconsciously. Despite his extreme ideas, remember he's still an Asgardian. I believe there's good in him yet. Thor puffed out his chest. See? He's good at heart, Tony. Tony's eyes narrowed. I can't make that guarantee. Nearby Sol, their newest ally, stood silent, unwilling to promise what she couldn't be sure of. The air crackled with unspoken threats and fragile hopes, each brother and ally wondering where Loki's true loyalties lay. Damien stood just behind Captain Rogers as the last of Tony Stark's team, Thor and Loki included, conferred in low voices. He watched the tension flare on Steve's face, and finally Steve broke in. Hold on a second, Steve said. Even if we manage to lure the Chitauri army into a trap. We have to, Tony insisted quietly. It's our best chance. But with our current methods, Steve countered, there's no guarantee we can actually defeat them. We'll still be risking countless lives. Tony met Steve's gaze. He didn't flinch. I know the numbers look grim. I've accounted for that. Trust me, once we're inside headquarters, I'll show you exactly how this works. You'll see. Natasha stepped forward beside Damien. She'd seen Tony grow tougher, more single-minded since the first invasion. No amount of argument was going to turn him from this plan. All right, she said softly. Let's see what Stark's solution really is. The three Avengers, Tony, Thor, and Loki, led the way to the fighter jets. In moments, Damien, Steve, and Natasha were buckled in. The jets roared to life and ascended, slicing through clouds until the gray hull of the Esield carrier hove into view. With a whoosh and a clank, the fighter docked against the carrier's side. Damien and the others disembarked to find a squad of well-armed agents waiting. Their boots clicked on the metal deck as they fell into formation. An agent inclined his head. Welcome back. Dr. Prescott is expecting you on level 3. Right this way. Damien exchanged a quick glance with Natasha. Whatever came next, they were all in now, and the fate of the world hinged on Stark's hidden plan. Banner, I need you to help him see the truth. Tony strode forward, his eyes sweeping over the row of soldiers. Our orders were to bring Loki in, alive. A grizzled general snapped to attention. Sir, those orders have been rescinded. Tony gave a curt nod and turned to Natasha. Whatever I say, you follow. Natasha lifted her chin. Understood, she replied, steeling herself before facing the men. Captain Rogers, Dr. Banner, we're ready. The general saluted smartly. Within moments, Tony, Steve, Natasha, and Thor, flanking a wary Loki, marched through the hangar bay toward the helicarrier's main control suite. Crew members paused in their duties. Some offered curious smiles, but as soon as they spotted Loki in chains, whispers turned to stares. Inside the control room, the gathered officers fell silent. One stepped forward and cleared his throat. Dr. Banner, welcome. Your research on anti-electron collisions is unparalleled. Another couldn't resist adding with a grin, and your last transformation was something else. Without missing a beat, Tony cut in. Bruce, let's get to work. Thank you. Banner hadn't expected Tony Stark to greet him that way the moment he arrived. Unsure how to reply, he simply offered his gratitude in return. And with that quiet exchange, the first update of the year, on this 17th day, made its debut.